Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another collection of stories for you today, and we're starting with one that still makes me shake my head. There's something about long distance relationships that requires an extra level of trust, right? Now imagine waiting months for your partner to come home, only to discover they made a detour you definitely weren't expecting. Before we jump in, I just want to say a huge thank you. Seriously, to everyone who's been tuning in, commenting, and supporting the channel. It truly means the world to me. I see you, I appreciate you, and your support is what keeps this whole thing moving. So picture this 8 months of separation. You're counting down the days, decorating the house, getting the kids excited for dad's return. Everything's planned perfectly. Then one photo changes absolutely everything. My husband works overseas, has for the last 3 years. Oil rig contracts, decent pay, long stretches away from home. We made it work because we had to. 8 months is a long time to be apart, but we video called when we could, texted throughout the day, made plans for his next visit home. I had a countdown going on the kitchen calendar. The kids had been asking every morning when Daddy was coming back, so when his flight was supposed to land on a Friday, I went all out. I deep cleaned the house, hung welcome home signs the kids made, planned his favorite meals for the entire weekend. I even bought new sheets. Pathetic in hindsight, but I was genuinely excited. We'd been talking about this visit for months. He kept saying how much he missed us, how he couldn't wait to be home, how he was counting down the hours just like I was. Thursday afternoon, I'm at the grocery store loading up on everything for his homecoming dinner when my phone buzzes. It's my cousin. Just a text, no context, just a photo. And I had to actually stop pushing my cart and just stare at my screen because I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was my husband, at the mall in our city, 2 days early, standing outside a restaurant with a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was laughing at something. He had his hand on her lower back. They looked comfortable, familiar, like people who'd done this before. I called him immediately. Hands shaking, heart pounding, the whole thing. He picked up on the third ring, sounding relaxed and happy. I asked him where he was. He said he was still traveling, that his connecting flight got delayed, that he'd probably land late Friday instead of early afternoon. I asked him again. He repeated the same lie, added some detail about airport traffic and how frustrated he was. His voice didn't even waver. I told him my cousin just sent me a photo of him at the Westfield Mall 20 minutes ago. The line went completely silent. Not even breathing, just dead air. Then he started stumbling over words, saying it must be a mistake. Maybe someone who looked like him, asking if I was sure it was even recent. I hung up. My cousin called me 10 seconds later. She'd seen them go into a hotel bar nearby and thought I should know. She seemed horrified, kept apologizing like it was her fault for telling me. I thanked her, left my entire cart in the middle of the aisle, and drove straight to that hotel. I don't even remember the drive. I just remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. And here's where it gets absurd. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and there it was. His rental car. The same model he always rented when he flew in. Same color, and I could see his work duffel bag in the back seat through the window. The bag I'd watched him pack on video calls. The one with our kids' drawing stuck to it. Just sitting there. Proof he'd been lying to my face while I stood in a grocery store, planning his favorite dinner. I walked into that hotel lobby like I was going to war. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew I needed to see him, needed him to look me in the eye and try to explain this. And I didn't have to wait long. He was sitting in the lounge area just off the lobby, with her, the same woman from the photo. She had his jacket draped over her shoulders. His jacket, the one I bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. He saw me before I got to the table. I watched his face go from relaxed to panic in about half a second. He stood up fast, knocking his chair back, already talking, already making excuses. She's a colleague, they flew in together. They were just grabbing a drink before heading to their separate rooms. This wasn't what it looked like. Standard script. Probably worked on someone before. I didn't say anything at first. I just pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Him, her, the jacket, the 2 drinks on the table, the hotel keycard sitting right there next to his phone. He tried to block me, actually put his hand on my phone, told me I was embarrassing myself. The woman just sat there frozen, looking between us like she'd walked into a trap she hadn't seen coming. I asked him if he wanted to keep lying, or if he wanted to at least respect me enough to tell the truth. He stuck with the colleague story. Said I was being paranoid and jealous, and that this was exactly why he hated coming home, because I always started drama. Imagine being this confidently wrong. I turned around and walked out. Didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't make a scene, just left. I heard him calling after me, but I kept walking. Got in my car, drove home, and the adrenaline finally wore off about halfway there. I had to pull over because I was shaking so badly I couldn't see straight. When I got home, I did exactly what I should have done months ago, if I'm being honest. I packed everything of his into trash bags, clothes, toiletries, the gifts he'd left behind from his last visit, everything, piled them in the garage. Then I called a locksmith, had the locks changed that night. Cost me extra for the emergency call, but it was worth every cent. The kids asked why I was putting Daddy's things in bags. I told them there was a change of plans and Daddy would be staying somewhere else for a bit. They didn't push it. I think they could tell something was wrong. Then came the breaking point. He showed up 3 days later, Sunday morning, rang the doorbell holding flowers and wearing the most pathetic, apologetic expression I've ever seen. I watched him through the window for a minute before I even acknowledged him. He kept ringing, then knocking, then calling my phone. I let it go to voicemail twice before I walked to the window with an envelope. Divorce papers. I'd gone to a lawyer Friday afternoon, explained everything, and she'd drawn up an emergency filing. I pressed the envelope against the glass and watched him read the label. He started yelling, saying I was overreacting, that I didn't even let him explain, that I was ruining our family over a misunderstanding. He pounded on the door hard enough that I thought he might actually break it. I opened the door just wide enough to hand him the envelope and told him his things were in the garage. He could pick them up whenever, and if he contacted me again without a lawyer present, I'd file for a restraining order. Then I closed the door and locked it. He stood there for another 20 minutes yelling through the door before he finally left. That's when the family got involved. His mother called me crying, saying I was keeping her grandchildren from their father over nothing. His brother sent me a long text about forgiveness and how marriage takes work. My own mother suggested maybe I should hear him out before making permanent decisions. They all acted like I was the one being unreasonable. So I sent them the photos, all of them, him with her at the mall, him with her at the hotel, her wearing his jacket, the hotel keycard on the table between them, the rental car with his bag in it proving he'd been in town for days while lying to me about delays. I didn't add commentary. Didn't need to. Just sent the photos and muted the group chat. The backpedaling was immediate. Suddenly it was all about how they didn't know the full story, how they were just trying to help, how of course I had every right to be upset. His mother stopped calling. His brother never responded. My own mother sent a short text saying she was sorry and that she supported whatever I decided. He tried a few more times to contact me, sent gifts to the house, had flowers delivered, showed up at my work once until security escorted him out. Every time I documented it, saved it, added it to the file my lawyer was building. She told me it was helping the case tremendously, showed a pattern of disrespect and harassment. Last I heard, he's telling people I blindsided him, that I never gave him a chance to explain, that I'm keeping the kids from him out of spite. He's rewriting the whole story to make himself the victim. But everyone who matters has seen the photos. They know what he did. They know he flew into town early to spend time with someone else before bothering to come home to his family. The divorce is moving forward. I've got full documentation of everything. The kids are adjusting. Some days are harder than others, but we're managing. And honestly, I sleep better now than I have in months. No more waiting for calls that come late or not at all. No more wondering why his stories don't quite add up. No more pretending everything's fine when I can feel in my gut that it's not. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Seriously, I want to know what country is staying up late for this mess. Now, where was I? Oh, right. While he was scrambling to explain himself to our families, I was already 3 steps ahead, which brings me to what happened next with the bank accounts. Because of course, someone who'd lie about being in town early would also have other secrets worth uncovering. I married into a family that never really wanted me there. That sounds dramatic, but it's just the truth. From the engagement party onward, I was tolerated at best. My mother-in-law had opinions about everything I did. My career wasn't prestigious enough. My cooking was never quite right. The fact that we didn't have kids yet was somehow both my fault and something she felt entitled to comment on at every single gathering. For years, I just took it. I'd show up to family dinners, help cook, clean up afterward while everyone else sat around talking, and smile through whatever passive-aggressive comment came my way that night. My husband's solution was always the same: keep the peace, don't rock the boat. They don't mean it that way. You're being too sensitive. So I kept quiet. I played the role they wanted me to play. The daughter-in-law who showed up when expected, brought the right dishes, asked the right questions, and never caused problems. It was exhausting, but I convinced myself it was what you did for family, that eventually they'd warm up to me if I just proved myself enough times. The only person who ever treated me like I actually mattered was my father-in-law. He was quiet, stayed out of the family drama, but he noticed things. When his wife made a comment about my job, he'd change the subject. When I was stuck doing dishes alone, he'd come help dry. Small things, but they meant something. When he got sick, I was the one who stepped up. His kids were busy with their own lives, always had an excuse for why they couldn't visit or help out. My husband would stop by occasionally, but never stayed long. So I became the one who drove him to appointments, picked up prescriptions, sat with him during the bad days. He had this lake house he'd bought years ago. It was run down, needed a lot of work, but he loved it. Talked about fixing it up, spending more time there once he retired. When he got too weak to do the work himself, I offered to help. Spent weekends there with him, painting, fixing loose boards, updating the kitchen. He'd sit in his chair and direct me, tell stories about buying the place, about bringing his kids there when they were young. We got close during those months. He told me once that I was the only one who actually showed up, that his own kids treated him like an obligation. I tried to defend them, said they were just busy, but he shook his head, said busy was just an excuse people used when something wasn't a priority. He passed away on a Tuesday, peaceful, at home, with me sitting beside him because nobody else had bothered to visit that week. The funeral was the usual performance. Everyone crying, talking about what a great man he was, sharing memories like they'd been devoted children. I stayed quiet, helped organize everything, played my role. The will reading happened 2 weeks later. The lawyer went through everything methodically. Money split between the kids, some items divided up, the usual estate things. Then he got to the lake house. I wasn't really paying attention at that point, just waiting for it to be over so I could leave. But that wasn't even the worst part. The lawyer said my name, said my father-in-law had left me the lake house, full ownership. There was even a letter explaining why, thanking me for the time I'd spent with him, for helping him fix the place up, for treating him like he mattered and not like a burden. He wrote that I'd earned it, that I was the only one who'd actually cared. The room went completely silent. Then my sister-in-law started laughing, this sharp, bitter sound. Said there was obviously a mistake, that he must have been confused at the end, that I'd probably manipulated him somehow. My brother-in-law just stared at me like I'd personally robbed him. My husband looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, not meeting my eyes. His mother turned to me with this cold smile and said we'd need to fix this obvious error, that the house should stay in the family. I pointed out that I was family. She clarified that she meant blood family, said I should do the right thing and sign it over to them, that it's what her husband would have really wanted if he'd been thinking clearly. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to acknowledge that his father had made this choice deliberately. He cleared his throat and suggested maybe we should all take some time to think about what's fair. What's fair? Like his father's explicitly stated wishes weren't clear enough. The lawyer tried to move forward, but the siblings kept interrupting, demanding to know how this happened, insisting there must be grounds to contest, talking over each other about how inappropriate this was. I sat there listening to them tear apart a dying man's final decisions because they didn't get what they wanted. That's when I stopped being the quiet daughter-in-law who kept the peace. I stood up and told them I was keeping the house, that their father had left it to me because I was the one who actually showed up for him, who spent time with him, who helped him fix the place when none of them could be bothered, that if they had a problem with his decision, they could take it up with his lawyer, but I was done discussing it. My mother-in-law actually gasped, like I'd slapped her. My husband tried to pull me aside, said we needed to talk about this privately, that I was making things worse. I told him we could talk at home and walked out. The messages started that night, first from his siblings, then their spouses, then extended family members I barely knew, all saying the same thing in different ways, that I was being selfish. that I'd stolen their inheritance, that I should be ashamed, that family takes care of family. The irony of that last one was almost funny. My husband kept trying to play mediator, said maybe we could work out a compromise, sell the house and split the money, something to smooth things over. I asked him point blank if he thought his father was senile when he made the will. He said no, but that didn't mean we couldn't be flexible, that his family was hurting and maybe I could be the bigger person here. And here's where it gets absurd. I hired a lawyer, not to contest anything, just to protect what was legally mine. And my lawyer did something smart. She requested all communications related to the estate. Turns out my in-laws had been emailing each other for weeks before the will reading, planning how to contest it if things didn't go their way. They'd already talked to 3 different lawyers about challenging their father's mental competency. They'd been planning to fight the will before they even knew what was in it. They just assumed he might leave something to me and wanted to be prepared to take it away. My lawyer sent them a letter laying all this out, included screenshots of their emails that the estate lawyer had been copied on, told them any contest would be seen as exactly what it was, bitter children angry they didn't get everything, that we had documentation of their planning, of their discussions about claiming incompetency for a man who'd been sharp until his final days. The messages stopped for about 3 days. Then my husband came home and said we needed to talk. His mother had called him crying. His siblings were furious. The family was being torn apart and it was my fault. He said maybe we should just sign the house over, that it wasn't worth destroying his family over a property. I asked him if he remembered the last 3 years, me driving his father to appointments while his siblings were too busy, me sitting with him during chemo while his kids sent texts asking how he was doing instead of visiting, me spending weekends fixing up that house while everyone else had better things to do. He said that was different, that I'd done those things because I wanted to, not because I expected payment. Like showing up for someone you care about was supposed to be transactional. Like his father leaving me something wasn't about gratitude, but about me scheming for inheritance. I told him I was keeping the house. That if he couldn't support that, we had bigger problems than his family's hurt feelings. He moved out 2 weeks later, said he needed space to think. His family took that as confirmation that I was the villain in all this, that I'd chosen a house over my marriage. Never mind that he'd chosen their approval over his wife. Never mind that they'd spent years treating me like garbage, and I was supposed to just accept it forever. I filed for separation a month after that. My lawyer from the estate became my divorce lawyer. She was great, kept everything documented, had records of every nasty message his family had sent, every attempt to manipulate or threaten me into giving up what was legally mine. The divorce went through faster than I expected. Turns out, when you don't actually want to reconcile, things move pretty quickly. He got the marital home, I kept the lake house. Clean split, no drama in court, just paperwork and signatures. His family lost their minds, sent more messages, had relatives I'd met maybe twice call me to lecture about family values and forgiveness. My ex's mother actually showed up at my work once to tell me I'd ruined her son's life. Security escorted her out while she shouted about what a selfish person I was. I blocked them all, every number, every email, every social media account. Changed my locks, updated my address, made it clear through my lawyer that any further contact would be considered harassment. Now I spend most weekends at the lake house, the place I helped renovate, that holds memories of the one person in that family who actually valued me. It's peaceful, quiet. Nobody showing up to criticize how I've decorated or what I'm cooking, or why I'm there alone. They still try sometimes, friends of friends reaching out to tell me the family misses me, that I should reconsider, that holding grudges isn't healthy. I don't even respond anymore. They made their choices, I made mine. The best part is knowing they can't take it from me. The house is mine, legally and completely. Every attempt they made to contest the will failed. Every manipulation tactic fell flat. They spent years treating me like I didn't matter, and now they're stuck watching me enjoy something they desperately wanted but never earned. People ask sometimes if I regret it, if maybe I should have compromised to save the marriage or keep the family peace. And honestly, no. I regret wasting years trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it. I regret staying quiet when I should have spoken up, but keeping what was given to me by someone who actually appreciated me, that's the one thing I got right. But you know what's worse than in-laws who underestimate you? Parents who think they can script your entire future without asking. I don't celebrate Christmas with my family anymore. Haven't for 3 years now. And this story is exactly why. I was living across the country at the time, had my own apartment, my own life, a job I actually liked. But my parents kept insisting I come home for the holidays. Said the family missed me, that it had been too long, that it would mean so much to them. The guilt trip was relentless, so I finally caved and booked a flight home for Christmas week. The moment I walked through the door, something felt off. My mum was too excited, too nervous, kept fussing over my hair and what I was wearing. My dad had this weird, satisfied smile, like he'd just closed a business deal. I figured they were just happy to see me and tried to ignore the weird energy. Then the extended family started arriving for Christmas dinner. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, and every single one of them congratulated me on my engagement. I laughed it off at first, told them there must be some confusion, that I wasn't engaged. My aunt looked genuinely confused and said my mother had told everyone about the wedding next summer. My cousin asked to see the ring. I held up my empty hand and said again, "I'm not engaged to anyone." My mother swooped in at that point and steered me toward the kitchen, smiling this tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She told me to just go along with it for now, that we'd talk later. I asked her what exactly I was supposed to be going along with. She said we'd discuss it after dinner and basically pushed me back toward the living room. Dinner was surreal. People kept making toasts to my future, asking about wedding plans, telling me how lucky I was. I kept trying to correct them, but my parents would talk over me or change the subject. My dad introduced me to a couple I'd never met, said they were dear friends of the family. Then he introduced their son. I'd met him exactly twice. Once at some networking event my parents dragged me 2 years ago, and once at a charity function where we maybe exchanged 5 words. He looked as uncomfortable as I felt, just nodded politely and barely made eye contact. After dinner, my mother pulled out a binder. An actual 3-ring binder, stuffed full of magazine cutouts, printed emails, fabric samples. She opened it on the coffee table like she was presenting a business proposal and started walking me through the wedding plans. Venue booked for July, saved the dates already designed. She'd chosen my bridesmaids, picked out centerpieces, selected a cake flavor. She even had a seating chart with names I didn't recognize filling 8 rows. I just stared at this binder trying to process what I was looking at. I asked her what she was talking about. She said she and Michael's parents had been planning this for months, that it was a perfect match, that our families had always been close. I pointed out that I'd met Michael twice and didn't even have his phone number. She waved that away like it was a minor detail, said we'd have plenty of time to get to know each other before the wedding. That's when I realized she was completely serious. I asked her if she'd lost her mind. She got this wounded look and said she was trying to help me, that I was almost 30 and still single, that this was a good opportunity for both families. My father joined in, talking about how Michael came from good stock, how the marriage would strengthen their business partnership, how I should be grateful they'd found someone suitable. Suitable. Like I was a business merger and not their actual daughter. I asked point blank if anyone had bothered to ask Michael if he wanted this, or me. My mother said that's why we were all here, to celebrate the arrangement now that everything was finalized. I told her nothing was finalized because I hadn't agreed to any of this. My dad's expression shifted, got hard. He said I was being childish and ungrateful, that they'd put a lot of work into this, that I owed them the respect of at least considering it. I told him there was nothing to consider because I wasn't marrying a stranger to make his business deals easier. And here's where it gets absurd. My mother pulled out a wedding dress, from the closet in the hallway, in my size, already purchased. She held it up with this hopeful smile and asked if I wanted to try it on, like I was going to see the dress and suddenly be okay with being sold off like cattle. I stood up and announced to the entire room that I was not engaged, that I had never agreed to marry anyone, that my parents had apparently lost their minds and planned the entire wedding without my knowledge or consent. My voice was shaking, but I got it all out. Said I'd be leaving immediately and they could cancel whatever they'd booked because I wanted no part of this. My dad stood up so fast his chair fell over, told me to sit down and stop making a scene. I headed for the stairs to grab my suitcase. He actually moved to block the stairway, standing there with his arms crossed, telling me I was embarrassing the family and owed everyone an apology. I pulled out my phone and called the police, asked for a civil standby so I could safely collect my belongings and leave. My mother started crying, my aunts were gasping, my dad was yelling about how I was being dramatic. I just stayed on the line with the dispatcher until she confirmed officers were on the way. The next 20 minutes were chaos, my parents alternating between begging me to reconsider and accusing me of ruining everything, extended family trying to mediate, asking if we could all just calm down and talk this through. Michael's parents looking absolutely mortified, and Michael himself just sitting there silently, staring at his plate. The police arrived, 2 officers. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, that I'd come home for a visit, discovered my parents had planned a wedding without my consent, and now wanted to leave, but my father was preventing me from accessing my belongings. The officers were professional about it, told my parents to step aside and let me pack. I went upstairs escorted by one officer, while my parents argued with the other one downstairs. I could hear my dad insisting this was a family matter, that the police had no business being involved, that I was being manipulative. The officer calmly told him that an adult had the right to leave any situation they wanted to leave. I threw everything into my suitcase as fast as I could. Didn't even fold anything, just stuffed it all in. Came back downstairs, thanked the officers, and walked out the front door. My mother was sobbing on the couch. My father was red-faced and silent. The entire extended family just stared. I drove straight to a hotel near the airport and changed my flight to the next available departure. Sat in that hotel room shaking, alternating between rage and complete disbelief. My phone started blowing up immediately. My parents, my aunts, family friends, all telling me I'd overreacted, that I should come back and talk this out, that I'd humiliated everyone. I blocked most of them. Then I got a text from an unknown number. It was Michael. He apologized for everything, said he'd tried to tell his parents he wasn't interested, but they'd pressured him into going along with it. Said he had a girlfriend he'd been dating for 2 years, but his parents didn't approve of her. That they'd threatened to cut him off financially if he didn't agree to the arrangement. We texted back and forth for a bit, both venting about our completely unhinged parents, both agreeing that we wanted nothing to do with this nightmare. He said he was going to tell his girlfriend everything and go no contact with his family. I told him I'd already started the process on my end. Over the next few weeks, my parents tried everything. Crying voicemails about how I'd broken their hearts, angry messages about the deposits they'd lose, emails from relatives asking me to reconsider, saying this was just cultural differences and I should respect their traditions. My father sent one message threatening to cut me out of the will. I replied that I wanted nothing from them anyway and to lose my number. I changed my phone number eventually, updated all my social media privacy settings, made it clear to the few family members I still talked to that any information about me was not to be shared with my parents, built clear boundaries and actually enforced them. Michael did the same thing. He posted on social media that he was in a committed relationship and wouldn't be participating in any arranged marriage. His parents apparently threw a fit, but he stuck to his boundaries. We stayed in touch occasionally, bonded by shared trauma and mutual understanding of what it's like to have parents who view you as property. The wild part is my parents still don't think they did anything wrong. According to flying monkeys who occasionally slip through, they tell people I was brainwashed by Western values, that I abandoned my culture, that I'm selfish and ungrateful. They've completely rewritten the narrative where they're the victims and I'm the villain. And honestly, I'm fine with that. Let them tell whatever story they need to tell. I'm 3,000 miles away living my actual life, making my own choices, dating who I want to date. The peace I've found since cutting them off is worth more than any relationship with people who thought they could auction me off to benefit their business connections. People ask sometimes if I'll ever reconcile with them, if maybe when enough time passes I'll reach out, and the answer is no. You don't come back from something like this. You don't plan someone's entire wedding without their knowledge and then act like they're the unreasonable one for objecting. That's not love. That's ownership, and I'm not interested in being owned by anyone. Speaking of families making financial decisions without consent, let me tell you about the debt that was supposedly ours. I met my ex during college and we dated for about 4 years. Toward the end of our relationship, we decided to buy a car together. We needed reliable transportation. Both had okay credit, and it seemed like a reasonable shared expense at the time. I remember sitting in the dealership going over paperwork, him talking to the finance guy while I signed where they pointed. Standard couple purchase, or so I thought. When we broke up about a year later, it was relatively amicable. No huge blow up, just grew apart, wanted different things, the usual story. We sat down and divided everything up. He'd keep the apartment, I'd move out. We'd split the furniture we'd bought together. The car became a negotiation point because we'd both been using it, but technically it lived at his place, since that's where the parking spot was. He suggested he'd keep making the car payments if I covered the insurance. Seemed fair enough. The insurance was cheaper than the monthly payment. I didn't need the car anymore since I was moving closer to work, and he did. We shook on it. He even texted me afterward confirming the arrangement, saying he appreciated me being reasonable about everything. I thought we were handling the breakup like adults. I moved on with my life, started dating someone new, focused on my career, saved up for a down payment on a condo. About 8 months after the split, I decided to actually start the mortgage application process. I'd been pre-approved before but wanted to see current rates, get serious about buying. My loan officer asked for permission to pull my credit report. I said sure, expecting everything to look fine. I'd been responsible, paid everything on time, kept my utilization low. The loan officer called me back 3 days later, asked if I knew my credit score had dropped almost 200 points. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She started listing items, a repossession, a charge-off, multiple late payments reported over 6 months, collections activity. I genuinely didn't understand what she was talking about. I pulled my own credit report that night and just stared at it. The car loan, the one my ex was supposed to be paying, reported as 60 days late, then 90, then 120, then repossessed, then charged off and sent to collections. Every single late payment tanked my score. The repossession destroyed it. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I texted asking what happened with the car payments. He responded 3 hours later with a shrug emoji and got tight on money, had to let some things go, like it was a gym membership he'd cancelled, not a loan in my name that he'd promised to pay. I called again. This time he picked up. I asked when he'd stopped paying. He said probably around month 2, maybe 3. He couldn't remember exactly. I asked why he didn't tell me. He said he figured I'd find out eventually and didn't want to deal with me being upset. The car had been repossessed 4 months ago. He'd just been using Uber since then. I asked him about the arrangement we'd made. He actually laughed. Said, yeah, that was the plan, but plans change and I should have been checking on it if it mattered that much. I told him this destroyed my credit. He said that sounded like a me problem. That's when I asked him to send me the loan paperwork. He asked why. I said I wanted to see both our names on it since we'd bought it together. He went quiet. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said I might want to actually read contracts before signing them next time. I went through every piece of paperwork I'd kept from the car purchase. Loan agreement, title, registration, everything. Only my name, just mine. On all of it. He'd never signed anything. I'd been so focused on the excitement of buying a car together, so trusting of the relationship, that I never actually verified he was on the loan with me. He'd just let me believe it was joint. But that wasn't even the worst part. I called the dealership, explained the situation. They pulled up the file. The finance manager remembered us. Said my ex had specifically asked not to be on the loan because his credit wasn't good enough to qualify for the rate they were offering. That they'd put it in my name alone to get better terms. That this was explained at the time and I'd agreed to it. I don't remember that conversation. Maybe it happened and I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I trusted him to handle his share, regardless of whose name was on paper. But it didn't matter what I remembered because the paperwork was clear. This was my debt, my responsibility, my problem. Collections was calling me 4 times a day. The defaulted loan was over $12,000 with fees and interest. My credit was ruined. I couldn't get a mortgage. I could barely get approved for a new credit card. And my ex was out there living his life like he hadn't just torpedoed my financial future because he couldn't be bothered to make payments he'd promised to make. I called him one more time, asked him directly if he'd pay what he owed. He said he didn't owe anything, that the loan was in my name so it was my debt, and that maybe this would teach me to be more careful in the future. Then he hung up. I sat there for a long time, just processing the audacity. This person I dated for 4 years, lived with, planned a future with, had deliberately let me destroy my credit rather than admit he couldn't afford payments, had laughed when confronted, had essentially told me I deserved it for trusting him. Fine. If that's how he wanted to play it, I could work with that. I paid off the entire loan, $12,000 plus change. Wiped out most of my down payment savings, called the collections agency, negotiated a settlement, paid it in one lump sum. My credit was still trashed from the late payments and repossession, but at least the debt was gone and I could start rebuilding. Then I went to a lawyer. Small claims court has a limit, but I was within it. I wanted half the loan amount back, plus the fees I'd paid. My lawyer looked over everything and said I had a decent case if I could prove he'd agreed to make payments. I showed her the texts, the one right after we broke up where he confirmed he'd handle the car payment if I did insurance. The messages later where he admitted he'd stopped paying. His own words acknowledging the arrangement. She filed the case. He got served at work, which I have to admit felt pretty satisfying. He texted me furious, saying I was being petty, that I couldn't prove anything, that the court would laugh this out. I didn't respond. Court day came. I showed up with printed texts, a timeline of payments and missed payments, documentation of the debt, and what I'd paid to clear it. He showed up in jeans and a t-shirt looking annoyed. The judge asked him if he'd agreed to make the car payments. He said it was a verbal agreement that didn't mean anything. The judge asked if he'd put that agreement in writing. I handed over the texts. The judge read them, asked my ex if these were his messages. He said yes, but that didn't make it a contract. The judge disagreed, said the texts constituted a clear agreement, that my ex had acknowledged his responsibility multiple times in writing, and that backing out of that agreement caused me documented financial harm. Judgment in my favor. Half the loan amount, plus the fees I'd paid to settle it, plus court costs, about $8,000 total. My ex looked like he'd been slapped. He tried arguing, but the judge shut him down, said the ruling was final and he had 30 days to pay. Those 30 days came and went. No payment. I sent a formal demand. Nothing. He blocked me on everything. So I went back to my lawyer and filed for wage garnishment. If he wouldn't pay voluntarily, the court would take it directly from his paycheck. The garnishment went through. I started getting payments. Not much at first, maybe $100 or $2 per check depending on what he made, but it was something, and more importantly, every single paycheck he got, he saw money taken out. Money going to me, a reminder that actions have consequences. He tried to get the garnishment removed, filed a motion saying it was causing him financial hardship. The judge denied it, said he'd had multiple opportunities to pay and had chosen not to. That garnishment was appropriate given his refusal to comply with the court order. Last I heard through mutual friends, he's still making payments. Will be for another year or so at the rate it's going. He apparently complains about it constantly. Tells people I'm vindictive and crazy, that I sued him over a breakup. Never mentions the part where he destroyed my credit and laughed about it. My credit is slowly recovering. The late payments will fall off eventually. The repossession hurts, but it's not permanent. I'm rebuilding, saving again. My mortgage plans are delayed but not destroyed, and every month I get that garnishment payment. I'm reminded that trusting people doesn't make you stupid, but letting them get away with it does. The really funny part is, he could have avoided all of this. If he'd just told me when he couldn't make payments, we could have figured something out. Refinanced in both our names, sold the car, something. But he chose to lie, to hide it, to let it blow up my credit, and then to mock me for trusting him. People ask if it was worth it. The lawyer fees, the court time, the hassle of the garnishment. And honestly, yes. Not even for the money, though getting that back helps. But because he thought I'd just take it. Thought I'd be too embarrassed or too defeated or too whatever to do anything about it. He underestimated how much I hate being played for a fool. Every garnished paycheck is a little reminder. You can burn someone, but you better make sure they don't have receipts. And if you think that's bad, wait until you hear about the boss who weaponized my honesty against me. I worked in medical billing for 3 years at a mid-sized clinic. Not the most exciting job, but it was stable. The pay was decent, and I was good at it. My boss seemed to think so too. She'd constantly tell me how detail-oriented I was, how she could always count on me to get things right. What she didn't say out loud was that she also expected me to help her commit insurance fraud. It started small. She'd suggest I code a basic office visit as a more complex consultation. Said it would help the practice stay competitive, that everyone did it, that insurance companies expected a certain amount of inflation in billing. I looked at the chart, looked at the codes, and told her I couldn't do that. The documentation didn't support it. She laughed it off that first time, said I was being too cautious, that I'd understand the business side of things eventually. But she didn't push it, just took the file back and processed it herself. Then it kept happening. Every few weeks, she'd bring me a claim and suggest coding it higher than what was documented. A level 3 visit coded as level 5, a simple procedure billed as complex, add-on services that never actually happened. Each time, I'd refuse. Each time, she'd make a comment about how I needed to be more flexible, think about the bigger picture, understand that this was how medical practices survived. I knew what she was asking me to do. Upcoding is fraud, it's illegal. You can lose your certification, face criminal charges, destroy your entire career. And for what? So the practice could squeeze extra money out of insurance companies? Not worth it. So I kept processing claims correctly, by the book, exactly how I'd been trained. If the documentation said level 3, I coded level 3. If a procedure wasn't documented, it didn't get billed. Simple as that. My boss started making comments about my productivity. Said I was slower than the other billers, that maybe I was overthinking things. I pointed out that my accuracy rate was higher and my denial rate was lower. She didn't have much to say to that. Then my annual review came up. I wasn't worried. My numbers were solid, I rarely made mistakes. Providers actually complimented my work. I walked into that review expecting maybe some constructive feedback, but overall positive marks. She spent 45 minutes praising me, called me one of the most detail-oriented employees she'd ever supervised, said my integrity was rare in this industry, told me she was giving me a raise because I was exactly the kind of employee the practice needed. I left that meeting feeling pretty good about myself, honestly. Felt like all those times I'd refused to cut corners had been noticed and appreciated. 2 weeks later, she called me into her office. HR was there. That's never a good sign. She told me they were letting me go, effective immediately. I just sat there for a second, trying to process what I was hearing. I asked why. She said it was performance-related, that I wasn't meeting standards. I looked at the HR rep, who wouldn't make eye contact, then back at my boss. I asked what specific standards I wasn't meeting. She said I was too slow at processing claims, that the practice needed someone who could handle higher volume. I pointed out that I processed the same number of claims as everyone else on the team, actually slightly more. She said my pace was holding back the department. None of it made sense. My numbers were good. My accuracy was high. I'd just gotten a raise and a glowing review. But here's the thing about at-will employment in most states. They don't actually need a good reason to fire you. They just need a reason that isn't illegal. The HR rep slid a separation agreement across the desk, standard severance package in exchange for signing away my right to sue. They clearly wanted this done quickly and quietly. I told them I needed time to review it with a lawyer. My boss's expression tightened, but she nodded. Said I had until end of business the next day. I left that office knowing exactly what had happened. She didn't fire me because I was slow. She fired me because I wouldn't commit fraud for her. She needed someone in that position who would play along, and I wasn't it. The glowing review 2 weeks earlier had been her final attempt at buttering me up, seeing if praise and money would make me more compliant. When it didn't, I became a liability. But that wasn't even the worst part. I didn't sign the separation agreement. Instead, I filed for unemployment. And that's when things got interesting. When you file for unemployment after being terminated, the employer has to provide documentation justifying the termination. They have to show cause. My former boss submitted a statement claiming I was fired for poor performance. Included some vague metrics about processing speed that didn't actually match any real data. The unemployment office requested my performance reviews. All of them, including the one from 2 weeks before I was fired where she'd praised my integrity and given me a raise. They also requested my actual production numbers compared to other staff. Suddenly her story wasn't adding up. You don't fire someone for poor performance 2 weeks after praising them and giving them more money. The unemployment examiner flagged it as suspicious and forwarded the case for additional review. That additional review triggered an audit, not of me, of the practice. Specifically of the billing department. An insurance fraud investigator started going through years of claims, looking for patterns, discrepancies, documentation issues, and they found them. Lots of them. Turns out my former boss had been systematically upcoding claims for years. The other billers who'd replaced me, and the ones who'd been there longer, had all been doing what she asked. Coding services that weren't documented. Billing for procedures that never happened. Adding complexity levels that weren't supported by provider notes. It was everywhere. Thousands of fraudulent claims going back at least 5 years. The kind of thing that doesn't happen by accident or because of sloppy work. It was deliberate, systematic fraud. The investigator interviewed everyone in the billing department. Apparently, several of them admitted that my boss had instructed them to code things a certain way, that she'd told them it was standard practice. One of them actually mentioned that I'd been the only biller who consistently refused. The practice got hit with massive fines. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties and repayments. Several insurance companies filed complaints. The state licensing board got involved. It was a complete disaster for them. My former boss was fired immediately. Not just fired, but reported to every relevant professional organization. Her certifications were revoked. She's on a federal exclusion list now, which means she can't work in any capacity for any healthcare provider that accepts Medicare or Medicaid. In medical billing, that's basically a permanent industry ban. And suddenly, the practice was very interested in settling with me. My lawyer negotiated a wrongful termination settlement that included back pay, compensation for lost wages, and enough extra that I didn't have to worry about finding a new job immediately. They also agreed to provide a neutral reference and not contest my unemployment claim. The whole thing took about 8 months from filing for unemployment to getting the settlement check. 8 months of watching that practice implode from the outside while I found a better job at a hospital with an actual compliance department and ethics training. I ran into one of my former co-workers a few months after everything settled. She told me the billing department had been completely restructured, everyone retrained, new policies implemented. Said they brought in an outside compliance consultant who basically tore apart everything my old boss had built and started over. She also told me my former boss had been trying to find work in medical billing and couldn't get hired anywhere, that every application she submitted got rejected once they ran her background and saw the exclusion list. Apparently, she'd been complaining on social media about how unfair it all was, how she'd just been trying to keep the practice profitable, how she was being scapegoated. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. She'd spent years committing fraud, got caught because she fired the one person who wouldn't participate, and somehow still thought she was the victim in this situation. Last I heard, she'd moved to a different state and was working retail. The medical billing career she'd spent decades building was completely gone, all because she couldn't handle one employee who insisted on following the law. I think about that sometimes, how close I came to just going along with it. How much easier my life would have been in the short term if I'd just coded what she told me to code and kept my head down. How I could be sitting in prison right now or banned from my own career if I'd made a different choice. But I also think about how that glowing performance review 2 weeks before she fired me was probably the most honest thing she ever said to me. She did value my integrity. She just valued it as a threat that needed to be eliminated, not as an asset worth keeping. The whole experience taught me something important. Doing the right thing doesn't always protect you in the moment. Sometimes it costs you your job, your stability, your peace of mind. But in the long run, having a clear conscience and a clean record is worth more than any paycheck from someone asking you to break the law. I'm at a better job now, one where compliance isn't just a suggestion, where coding accurately is expected and valued, where nobody's asking me to commit fraud to meet quotas. And every time I process a claim correctly, I think about my old boss and how her entire career imploded because she couldn't accept that some people actually care about doing things right. But sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from your boss. It comes from the people who are supposed to have your back. My aunt called me in early June about a family reunion she was planning. Said she'd rented out this whole resort for a weekend in August, that it had been too long since everyone got together, that she really wanted the whole family there. She was laying it on thick about how important it was, how much it would mean to her, how the cousins never got to see each other anymore. I was hesitant. Family gatherings were always exhausting, and a whole weekend sounded like a lot. But she kept pushing, said she'd already put down deposits, that my kids would love the resort amenities, that it would be good for everyone to reconnect. Eventually I agreed, booked the time off work, packed up the car, drove 6 hours with 2 kids asking are we there yet every 20 minutes. We arrived Friday evening. The resort was nice, I'll give her that. My aunt had really gone all out. She greeted us in the lobby with this huge smile, got us checked in, told us dinner was at 7 in the main dining room, said everyone was so excited to see us. That should have been my first warning sign. Nobody's ever that excited about a family reunion. Dinner started normal enough, catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in years, watching the kids run around with their cousins, the usual small talk about jobs and weather and who'd gotten taller. My aunt kept checking her watch though, and people kept glancing at me with these weird expressions I couldn't quite read. We were maybe halfway through the meal when my uncle stood up, tapped his glass like he was making a toast. The room got quiet. He cleared his throat and said he was glad everyone could make it, that this weekend was about more than just reconnecting, that they'd actually gathered everyone here to address some serious family issues that had been going on. I remember feeling confused, looking around trying to figure out what he meant. Then he said my name, said they needed to talk about my behavior and the damage I'd been causing to the family. My stomach dropped. I had no idea what he was talking about. I asked him to clarify what behavior exactly. He looked uncomfortable, glanced at my aunt, then said that I knew what I'd done, that my cousin Sarah had told them everything. Sarah was sitting 3 tables over, looking down at her plate. Wouldn't make eye contact with me. My aunt took over at that point, started listing accusations, that I'd manipulated their father's estate to cut Sarah out of her inheritance, that I'd turned Sarah's own children against her by spreading lies about her parenting, that I'd been gossiping about her marriage problems to anyone who'd listen, that I'd tried to sabotage her career. I just sat there frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. None of it was true, not a single word. I tried to interrupt, but my aunt held up her hand and said she wasn't finished, said that Sarah had been devastated by my actions, that the whole family was disappointed in me, and that they'd organized this reunion specifically so I could apologize publicly and we could all move forward. The whole room was staring at me. My kids were looking confused and scared. I could feel my face burning. I asked Sarah directly to look at me and explain what she was talking about. She finally looked up with tears in her eyes and said she just wanted her family back, that she didn't understand why I hated her so much. The performance was actually impressive. I'll give her that much. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I managed to open my voicemail and find the message I was looking for. From 3 weeks ago. I turned the volume all the way up and hit play. Sarah's voice filled the dining room, drunk, slurring slightly, rambling about how she couldn't believe I got the promotion at work that she'd wanted, how it wasn't fair that I always got everything, how she was going to make me regret it, how she'd been telling the family all this stuff about me and they were eating it up, how everyone believed her because she got to them first and I was too stupid to defend myself. She actually laughed about it, said it was easier than she thought it would be to turn everyone against me. The message was 2 minutes long. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Just Sarah's drunk voice echoing through the room, confessing to everything. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Then came the breaking point. My aunt tried to recover. Said that Sarah had obviously been going through a hard time, that people say things they don't mean when they're drinking, that we should all show some grace here. My uncle suggested maybe we could talk about this privately, that we didn't need to air everything out in front of everyone. I stood up, told them there was nothing to talk about privately, that Sarah had spent months lying about me to the entire family, that everyone here had believed her without once asking for my side of the story, that they'd ambushed me at what I thought was a family reunion just to humiliate me into apologizing for things I never did. My aunt started to speak, but I cut her off, said I was leaving, that I'd be checking out immediately and driving home tonight, that anyone who wanted to reach me could try, but I wouldn't be responding. Sarah finally spoke up, started crying harder, saying she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she never meant for it to go this far. I looked at her and said she'd made her choices, and now she could live with them, that I wanted nothing to do with her or anyone who'd believed her lies without question. I grabbed my kids and walked out of that dining room, went straight to the front desk and explained I needed to check out immediately. The staff was professional about it, didn't ask questions, just processed everything quickly. I packed our stuff while my kids asked what was happening. I tried to explain in simple terms that some family members had made a mistake and we weren't staying. My phone started blowing up before we even got to the car. My aunt calling, my uncle texting, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly messaging me, all variations of the same thing, asking me to stay, saying we should talk this through, claiming Sarah was really sorry and everyone deserved a second chance. I blocked them, not just Sarah, everyone who'd sat in that room and watched them try to publicly shame me without saying a word in my defense. Everyone who believed obvious lies without once reaching out to ask if they were true. By the time we hit the highway, I'd blocked about 90% of my extended family. The 6-hour drive home was long. The kids fell asleep in the back. I had a lot of time to think about how easily people will believe the worst about you if someone tells a good enough story. How family doesn't mean much when they're willing to ambush you based on gossip. Sarah tried to apologize a few days later, left voicemails, sent emails, had mutual friends reach out, all saying she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been jealous and stupid, that she wanted to make things right. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I forwarded her drunk voicemail confession to the family group chat, the one with everyone from the reunion in it. Added a message saying this was the truth about what happened, and that I wanted nothing further to do with any of them. Then I left the group chat and blocked the rest of the numbers I'd missed the first time. A few people tried to reach out afterward, mostly ones who hadn't been at the dinner, who'd heard about everything secondhand. They wanted to apologize on behalf of the family, said they couldn't believe people had acted that way. I appreciated the sentiment, but I didn't really want to maintain those relationships either. The whole family felt contaminated now. My aunt sent one final message before I blocked her, said I was being unfair, that Sarah had apologized, that I was tearing the family apart by refusing to forgive, that I was acting like a child and needed to be the bigger person. I never responded, because what do you even say to that? Sorry I won't accept public humiliation based on lies? Sorry I have boundaries? Sorry I won't pretend everything's fine so you can all feel better about ambushing me? It's been over a year now. I don't miss them. I don't miss dreading phone calls or wondering what rumors are circulating. I don't miss feeling obligated to show up to things where I'm clearly not wanted. My kids ask about their cousins sometimes, but honestly, they barely remember them. Sarah apparently tells people I'm holding a grudge, that I won't let go of one mistake, that I'm keeping her from her family. I heard this through someone who didn't know we weren't speaking. The narrative keeps shifting, but I'm always the villain somehow. And that's fine. They can rewrite history however they want. I've got the voicemail saved in 3 different places just in case anyone ever needs a reminder of what actually happened. But mostly I just don't think about them anymore. The people who really matter, who actually showed up for me over the years, those relationships got stronger after all this. Turns out when you cut out the people draining your energy, you have more to give to the ones who deserve it. Then there's the kind of disappearance that happens when you need someone most. My mum had a stroke on a Tuesday afternoon. I got the call from my dad while I was at work. He was barely coherent, just kept saying I needed to get to the hospital, that something was wrong, that the ambulance was there. I left my desk without even shutting down my computer, grabbed my keys, and drove straight there. The next 72 hours are mostly a blur. Doctors talking about clot-busting drugs and brain scans and rehabilitation potential. My dad sitting in the corner looking 10 years older than he had that morning. Me alternating between the waiting room and her bedside, watching monitors, waiting for updates, trying to process the fact that my healthy, active mother had just collapsed in her kitchen without warning. I texted my boyfriend updates throughout. We'd been together almost 2 years at that point, lived separately but talked about moving in together eventually. He knew my parents well, had dinner with them regularly. When I texted him that my mum was in the hospital, he immediately said he was on his way, that he'd be there soon, that I shouldn't worry about anything except being with my family. I waited for him, kept checking my phone between doctor updates, expecting to see him walking through the waiting room door. Hour 1 passed, then 2, then 4. I texted asking where he was, no response. Called, went straight to voicemail, figured maybe his phone died or he got stuck in traffic or something came up at work. By midnight, my mum was stable but still in ICU. My dad went home to sleep for a few hours. I stayed, curled up in an uncomfortable chair next to her bed, watching her breathe. My boyfriend still hadn't shown up, hadn't called, hadn't texted. I tried not to think about it, told myself he'd explain later that right now I just needed to focus on my mum. Day 2 was more tests, more waiting, consultations with neurologists about her prognosis. She was responsive but confused, couldn't move her left side, kept asking the same questions over and over. The doctors said it was too early to know how much function she'd regain, that the next few weeks would be critical. I nodded along, took notes, tried to be the strong daughter who had everything under control. I texted him again, just a simple update, Mum's stable, but it's bad. Could really use you here. Nothing. I called. Voicemail. Called again an hour later. Voicemail. Started to feel this creeping anxiety that had nothing to do with my mum's condition. Where was he? Was he okay? Had something happened to him too? Day 3, my mum got moved out of ICU into a regular room. Decent sign, the nurses said. Her vitals were stable, she was more alert, starting to ask coherent questions. My dad and I took turns sitting with her. I'd been at the hospital for 3 days straight at that point, sleeping in chairs, eating vending machine food, wearing the same clothes I'd had on when I got the first call. My phone buzzed. Finally. A text from him, not asking how my mum was doing, not apologizing for not showing up. Just, hey, I've needed some space. Hospitals really trigger my anxiety. Hope everything's okay. I read that text probably 5 times trying to make it say something different than what it said. He needed space while my mother was fighting for her life, while I was holding her hand through the scariest experience of our family's life. He'd needed space because hospitals made him uncomfortable. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say to that? I put my phone away and focused on my mum. She was starting physical therapy, relearning how to move her left arm, working with speech therapists. Small improvements every day. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. She'd need months of rehab, but they thought she could recover most of her function. 2 weeks later, I was back at my apartment for the first time in days. My mum had been transferred to a rehab facility, was making steady progress. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, running on autopilot. I'd just gotten out of the shower when someone knocked on my door. It was him. Standing there holding flowers, sunflowers, my favorite, smiling like nothing had happened. He walked in without being invited, set the flowers on my counter, and said he'd been doing a lot of thinking, that he'd processed his feelings about the hospital situation and was ready to support me now, that he understood this had been hard on me and he wanted to be there moving forward. I just stared at him. He'd processed his feelings, the crisis that nearly killed my mother, that left me alone and terrified for days, and he'd needed 2 weeks to process his feelings about it. I told him the crisis was over. My mum was in rehab, getting better every day, and we were over too. He looked genuinely shocked, asked what I meant. I told him exactly what I meant, that when I needed him most, he vanished. That he'd left me alone during the worst experience of my life because he was uncomfortable. That I'd texted and called for 3 days with no response, and he'd been processing his feelings while I was watching my mother fight to regain basic motor function. He got defensive immediately, said I was being unfair, that I didn't understand mental health, that his anxiety was real and valid. I told him I never said it wasn't valid, but that his response to my crisis was to disappear and then show up weeks later with flowers expecting everything to be fine. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of partner he'd be when things got hard. And here's where it gets absurd. He started crying, actual tears, saying I was being unforgiving, that everyone makes mistakes, that he'd explained about the hospital anxiety and I was punishing him for having mental health struggles, that if I really loved him, I'd understand and give him another chance. I asked him if he'd texted me back when I was begging for support, if he'd called once to check how I was doing, if he'd shown even the smallest bit of consideration for what I was going through. He said he'd been dealing with his own stuff and couldn't handle mine too. Like my mother's stroke was an inconvenience to his emotional schedule. I told him to leave. He refused, said we needed to talk this through, that I was making a mistake, that we'd been together too long to throw it away over one incident. I told him it wasn't one incident. It was a pattern I'd finally seen clearly, and if he didn't leave, I'd call the police. He left, but not quietly. Slammed my door so hard a picture fell off the wall. I locked the deadbolt behind him and just stood there shaking. That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't. He started texting. Long paragraphs about how much he loved me, how he'd made a mistake but people deserve second chances, how I was being cruel and cold. I blocked him. He started calling from different numbers. I stopped answering unknown calls. He showed up at my apartment twice more. Both times I didn't answer the door and he eventually left. Then he escalated, started showing up at the rehab facility where my mum was doing physical therapy, just sitting in the lobby, watching. My mum's nurse mentioned a man had been asking about me. When she described him, my stomach dropped. I confronted him in the parking lot, asked what he thought he was doing. He said he was proving he could be there for me, that he wanted to support me through my mum's recovery. I told him he was stalking me and it needed to stop. He said I was being dramatic, that he just wanted to talk. The next week he showed up at my mum's appointment again. This time I'd warned the staff, they asked him to leave. He argued with the receptionist, said he was family, that he had every right to be there. Security escorted him out. My mum asked what was going on. I explained as gently as I could. She looked horrified. That was visit number 5. I went straight to the police station and filed for a restraining order. Brought evidence of all the unwanted contact, the messages, the showing up after being told to stay away. The officer who took my report asked if I felt unsafe. I said yes, because I did. This person who claimed to love me had decided my boundaries didn't matter, that his feelings were more important than my explicitly stated wishes. The restraining order was granted. Temporary at first, then made permanent after the hearing. He tried fighting it, claimed I was lying about feeling threatened, that he'd never hurt me. The judge looked at the pattern of behavior and sided with me, said the contact was clearly unwanted and escalating, and that the order was appropriate. He violated it once, showed up at my workplace. I called the police, he got arrested, spent a night in jail. That finally seemed to get through to him. The contact stopped, the messages stopped. I could finally breathe without checking over my shoulder. My mom made a nearly full recovery. Slight weakness on her left side still, but she's independent. Driving again, back to most of her normal activities. We don't talk about him anymore. She asks sometimes if I'm dating anyone. I tell her I'm focused on other things right now. Truth is, that experience made me reevaluate what I'm willing to accept from people who claim to care about me. You learn a lot about someone during a crisis, and what I learned was that when things got scary, when I was vulnerable and desperate for support, he chose himself. Then had the audacity to come back expecting forgiveness, because he'd decided he was ready. Like my emotional timeline was supposed to wait for his. The restraining order is still active. Probably will be for years, and honestly that's fine with me. Some people show you exactly who they are when pressure gets applied. The trick is believing them the first time. And while we're on the subject of people who abandon you, let me tell you about my siblings' partnership. My brother called me one night about 3 years ago, completely fired up about a business idea. Custom furniture, high-end pieces for people who wanted something unique, not mass-produced garbage from big box stores. He'd always been good with his hands, had been building stuff in his garage for years, and finally had this vision for turning it into something real. The problem was he had no money and zero business experience. He knew how to build a table, not how to run a company. That's where I came in. I had some savings, had been working in corporate finance for about 7 years, understood the basics of business operations. When he pitched me on partnering up, it actually sounded reasonable. He'd handle the creative side and production, I'd handle the business side and provide startup capital. We'd split everything 50-50. We shook hands on it, literally just shook hands. No contracts, no formal agreements, just two brothers excited about building something together. Looking back, that handshake might be the dumbest thing I've ever done. I invested $40,000, helped him find a workshop space, negotiate the lease, purchase equipment. I built the entire website myself, set up the business email and social media, created systems for client management and invoicing. I spent 6 months working nights and weekends on this, while still keeping my day job, treating it like a second full-time position. The business started getting traction faster than either of us expected. Turns out there's real demand for custom furniture if you can deliver quality work at reasonable prices. My brother's craftsmanship was legitimately good, and the marketing I'd put together was driving steady inquiries. Within 4 months, we had a wait list. Then he met someone. Her name was Jessica, and according to my brother, she understood business better than anyone he'd ever met. She worked in marketing for some startup, had opinions about everything, and apparently saw potential in what we were building. At first, it was just suggestions. She'd tell my brother we should be pricing higher, targeting different clients, changing our messaging. He'd relay these ideas to me like they were revelations. I'd point out we already had a strategy that was working, but he started getting defensive. Said I should be more open to outside perspectives. Then she started showing up at the workshop, sitting in on client meetings, offering her input on designs and timelines. My brother introduced her as a consultant, which was news to me since we'd never discussed hiring anyone. let alone someone who'd be involved in core business decisions. I tried talking to him about it, said we should probably establish some boundaries, keep the business separate from his relationship, make sure we were on the same page about major decisions. He accused me of being controlling and threatened by his girlfriend's expertise. That's when things started shifting. I noticed I was getting looped into fewer email threads. Client communications I used to handle were suddenly being managed by my brother or Jessica. When I asked about it, he said they were just trying to be more efficient, that I seemed busy with my day job anyway. Then one morning I tried to log into the business email and my password didn't work. I texted my brother asking if something was wrong with the account. He said they'd updated security protocols and he'd send me the new credentials. He never did. I started getting more insistent, called him directly, said we needed to meet and sort out what was happening. He kept putting me off, saying he was slammed with orders, that we'd talk soon. 2 weeks went by. I still couldn't access the email, the social media accounts, anything. And here's where it gets absurd. I went to check the business bank account online, something I did regularly to monitor cash flow and expenses. I was locked out of that too. Called the bank. They told me I'd been removed as an authorized user on the account. I asked when. 3 weeks ago. I asked who authorized the change. The account holder, my brother. I drove straight to the workshop, found my brother and Jessica both there, going over designs with a client. I waited until they finished, then asked to speak with him privately. Jessica said whatever I needed to say could be said in front of her, since she was involved in the business now. I told them I'd been locked out of everything, the email, the bank account, all the systems I'd built. My brother had the audacity to look uncomfortable for about 5 seconds before Jessica jumped in, said they'd been meaning to talk to me about restructuring the partnership, that as the business evolved, they needed someone with more operational experience actively involved. And since I had my day job, I should probably step back into more of an advisory role. I looked at my brother, asked if he was seriously letting his girlfriend of 4 months tell me, his partner who'd invested $40,000 and built this entire business infrastructure, that I should step back. He wouldn't look at me, just mumbled something about how maybe it made sense for me to be more hands-off, that I was just the money guy anyway, and I should let him run the creative and operational side. Just the money guy. Like the 6 months I'd spent building everything from the ground up didn't count. Like the systems that were currently generating their income weren't my work. I told him we had a partnership agreement. He said we had a handshake. Jessica actually smirked at that. Said handshakes weren't legally binding, and if I had a problem with the current arrangement, I was welcome to discuss it with a lawyer. So I did exactly that. I hired a business attorney and walked him through everything. The initial agreement, my investment, my work building the business, the text messages discussing our 50-50 partnership. He reviewed it all and gave me news I didn't want to hear. I had no legal claim to the business. My brother had set everything up in his name only. The LLC, the bank accounts, the lease, all of it. I wasn't listed anywhere as a partner or owner, and a handshake deal with no written documentation was essentially worthless. But I could sue for my $40,000 back as a personal loan. If I could demonstrate that the money was meant to be repaid and not a gift, I had a case. And I had texts, messages where we discussed the investment, where he thanked me for believing in the business, where he talked about splitting profits once we were profitable. My lawyer sent a demand letter. We wanted the full $40,000 plus interest and compensation for my unpaid labor. My brother's response came through a lawyer Jessica apparently knew. They offered $10,000 to make me go away, said that was generous considering I couldn't prove anything. We went to court. Small claims wasn't an option given the amount, so it became a proper lawsuit. Discovery was interesting. Turned out the business was doing even better than I'd thought. They were pulling in solid revenue, had expanded the product line, were looking at opening a second location. All built on the foundation I'd created and funded. Now completely controlled by my brother and his girlfriend, who'd been dating for less than 6 months. This is where patience finally snapped. My lawyer found evidence that my brother had used my initial investment specifically to purchase equipment and secure the lease, that he'd documented it internally as startup capital from a partner, and that he'd never disclosed to his bank or his accountant that this was supposedly a loan he intended to repay. His own records contradicted the story his lawyer was trying to sell. We settled before going to trial, $35,000, not the full amount, not what I was owed for my labor, but enough that his lawyer advised him to pay it rather than risk a jury trial where his own documentation might work against him. I took the settlement, signed an agreement that I had no further claim to the business, that I wouldn't disparage them publicly, all the standard stuff, got a check for $35,000 and walked away from something I'd helped build from nothing. My brother still runs that business. Last I heard, it's doing great. They opened that second location. They've been featured in some local magazines. Jessica is listed as the operations manager on their website. It's this success story of a talented craftsman who built something from the ground up. I'm not listed anywhere. My contribution has been completely erased from the narrative. We haven't spoken in 2 years. He didn't invite me to his wedding when he married Jessica last year. I heard about it through our parents, who keep trying to mediate between us like this is some petty sibling squabble and not a massive betrayal. The $5,000 I lost on the settlement hurts. The time I invested that I'll never get back hurts. But what really stings is knowing that my own brother valued a woman he'd known for 4 months over a partnership with his brother, that he sat there and let her push me out, let her smirk while telling me I had no legal recourse and never once stood up for what we'd built together. I learned an expensive lesson about protecting yourself legally, even when you're working with family, especially when you're working with family. A handshake might feel more personal, more trusting, but trust doesn't hold up in court, and it doesn't prevent people from rewriting history when it's convenient. People ask if I regret helping him. Honestly, I regret not documenting the partnership properly. I regret trusting that family meant something more than legal paperwork. But I don't regret trying to build something with my brother. That part was genuine, even if it ended badly. What I do regret is not seeing the warning signs earlier. The way he started deferring to Jessica on everything. The way he started excluding me from decisions. The way he let someone else redefine our partnership without my input. I should have pushed back harder, demanded formal agreements, protected myself better. Instead, I learned that lesson the hard way. $35,000 and a destroyed relationship later. Of course, workplace betrayal can sting just as badly as family. I worked in accounting at a mid-sized firm for about 2 years before things started going sideways. The job itself was fine. Steady work, decent pay, normal office environment. I had a co-worker named Jennifer who seemed friendly enough when I started. We'd grab coffee sometimes, chat about weekend plans, the usual co-worker relationship. About 6 months in, I got called into HR for the first time. They said there'd been an error in one of my client files, a decimal point in the wrong place on a tax form. It was a significant mistake, the kind that could cost a client money if it went unnoticed. I was mortified. I apologized, said I had no idea how it happened, promised to be more careful. They seemed understanding, told me everyone makes mistakes, just to tighten up my processes. I went back to my desk completely confused. I check my work obsessively, always have. I'm the person who reviews things 3 times before submitting. A misplaced decimal didn't make sense, but I figured maybe I'd been distracted or rushing. It happens. Then it happened again. 3 weeks later, another HR meeting. This time it was an incorrect client code on a quarterly report. Then a week after that, missing documentation on a file I knew I'd attached. Each time I was baffled. Each time I apologized and promised to do better. My boss called me in after the 3rd incident, said he was concerned about the pattern, that he'd never had issues with my work before, but suddenly there were multiple errors in a short time frame. He was putting me on a performance improvement plan, 60 days to show measurable improvement, or we'd need to discuss my future with the company. I left that meeting feeling sick. A performance improvement plan is basically a countdown to being fired. I needed to figure out what was happening and fast. That night, I went through every file I'd worked on in the past 2 months, checked and rechecked everything, and that's when I noticed something. The errors only appeared in files I'd sent to Jennifer for review. We had a collaborative process where we'd review each other's work before final submission, catch any mistakes, provide a second set of eyes, standard quality control. I'd been sending Jennifer files regularly, and she'd been sending hers to me. But only my files were coming back with errors. I tested a theory, started keeping copies of everything before I sent it to her. Not just saving the file, but creating a completely separate backup with timestamps. Original versions saved in a folder she had no access to. And here's where it gets absurd. The next file I sent her came back with an error, a transposed number in a client account. HR called me in again, I told them I needed to check something and came back an hour later with two versions of the same file. The original I'd created and the version Jennifer had returned with her review notes. They had different timestamps. The error existed only in the version she touched. HR told me they'd look into it but seemed skeptical. Said it was possible I'd made the error and forgotten, that this wasn't proof of anything. I knew they weren't taking it seriously, so I kept gathering evidence. For 3 more months, I kept meticulous records. Every file I sent to Jennifer got backed up immediately with timestamps and version control. I documented every instance where she touched something and it came back with errors. I tracked patterns in when the errors appeared and what they affected. I had spreadsheets comparing original versus altered files. I had email timestamps showing when I'd sent clean work and when I'd received it back with problems. I had metadata from the documents themselves showing who'd made what changes and when. Turns out Jennifer had been sloppy. She hadn't bothered to strip the metadata or cover her digital tracks. The files literally showed her opening them, making changes, and saving them after I'd sent the originals. After 3 months, I had 13 documented instances. 13 times she'd altered my work to introduce errors, then either reported them herself or waited for them to be discovered. The pattern was unmistakable. I requested a formal meeting with HR and brought everything. 2 binders worth of documentation, printed emails, screenshots, comparison documents with highlighted differences, a timeline showing the pattern. I laid it all out methodically, explained that I'd been tracking this since being put on the performance improvement plan, that every error attributed to me in the past 4 months had occurred only after Jennifer reviewed my files, that I had proof she was altering my work. The HR director's expression changed about halfway through my presentation. She started taking notes, asked detailed questions, requested copies of everything I'd brought. They launched an investigation that day, pulled Jennifer's computer access logs, reviewed all the files in question, interviewed other team members about our working relationship. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Turns out I wasn't her first target. They found evidence of her doing similar things to another coworker 2 years earlier, someone who'd been fired for performance issues right around the time Jennifer got promoted. The patterns matched almost exactly. They also discovered she'd been telling our boss that I was difficult to work with, that I didn't take feedback well, that she had concerns about my attention to detail, building a narrative to explain why my work was suddenly full of errors, positioning herself as the concerned colleague, trying to help while actively sabotaging me. Jennifer was fired within a week. Not just fired, but escorted out of the building immediately. No 2 weeks' notice, no transition period. They terminated her that day. My boss called me in personally to apologize. Said he felt terrible for not seeing what was happening sooner, that he should have questioned the sudden decline in my performance. The performance improvement plan was removed from my record completely, like it never happened. I found out later through office gossip what her motivation had been. She wanted my position. I'd been hired into a role she'd applied for and didn't get. She'd been with the company longer, thought she deserved it more. Apparently, she'd convinced herself that if I got fired, they'd promote her into my spot. The logic was honestly deranged. Even if I'd been fired, there was no guarantee she'd get the job. They could have hired externally, promoted someone else, restructured entirely, but she'd built this whole plan around the idea that removing me would automatically benefit her. Instead, she destroyed her own career. She'd been with the company for 5 years, had good relationships with clients, knew the systems inside and out, and she threw it all away because she was bitter about not getting a position. The other co-worker she'd targeted, the one who'd been fired 2 years earlier, actually reached out to me after hearing what happened. We compared notes and the similarities were disturbing. Same tactics, same pattern of escalating errors, same performance improvement plan. She'd left the industry entirely after being fired, assumed she just wasn't cut out for accounting. I helped her put together documentation to approach our former employer about wrongful termination. She ended up settling with them for a decent amount, enough to make up for the damage to her career and reputation. As for me, I'm still at the same company. The whole experience made me paranoid about documentation for a while. I was backing up everything, saving every version, keeping detailed logs of all my work. My boss actually told me I could relax, that I didn't need to be that careful anymore. But honestly, the habit stuck. I still keep better records than most people, still document everything, because I learned that someone can destroy your career with a few keystrokes and a willingness to lie. And the only thing that saved me was being able to prove exactly what happened. People ask if I regret not catching on sooner, if I wish I'd confronted Jennifer directly instead of gathering evidence. And honestly, no. Confronting her would have given her time to cover her tracks or spin a different narrative. The methodical documentation was the only thing that made HR take it seriously. The wildest part is she tried to connect with me on LinkedIn a year later, just sent a connection request like we were old colleagues who'd parted on good terms. I declined and blocked her. Some audacity you just have to admire from a distance. But some deceptions go deeper than office politics. They attack the very foundation of your home. My partner and I had been together for 5 years when we started talking about buying a house. We'd been renting this cramped apartment, throwing money away every month, and it just made sense to invest in something we could actually own. We spent months looking at listings, going to open houses, arguing about neighborhoods and school districts and whether we needed a second bathroom. We finally found the perfect place. 3-bedroom, decent yard, in a neighborhood we both loved. The price was right at the top of our budget, but we could make it work. We sat down and did all the math together. Down payment would be $40,000. We'd split it evenly, 20 each. Monthly mortgage would be around $2,200. Utilities probably another 3 or 4. We'd each contribute half. I liquidated some investments to get my $20,000 together. Transferred it to our joint account where my partner had already deposited their share. We made an offer. It got accepted. I was so excited I called my parents immediately. We were buying a house, actually becoming homeowners, building equity instead of paying someone else's mortgage. The closing process was a blur of paperwork and inspections and appraisals. My partner handled most of it since they had more flexible work hours. I'd come home and they'd have me sign documents, explain what the inspector found, update me on timelines. I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? We were partners, building a life together. Moving day was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture that didn't fit where we thought it would, arguing about which wall the couch should go against. But it was our chaos, in our house, and I'd never been happier. I picked out paint colors for every room, spent weekends refinishing the deck, planted flowers in the front yard. My partner joked that I was nesting. I probably was. 6 months in, the place actually felt like home. We'd settled into routines, figured out the quirks of the heating system, knew which floorboards creaked. My partner decided to throw a housewarming party. Invite friends and family, show off what we'd done with the place, celebrate this milestone properly. I thought it was a great idea, spent days cleaning and prepping, made sure everything looked perfect. The party was fun, people wandering through rooms, complimenting our taste, asking about the neighborhood. My partner's best friend made a toast at one point, raised their glass and congratulated the new homeowner on this achievement. Singular. I noticed but didn't think much of it. Figured they just misspoke or maybe didn't realize we bought it together. Later that night, after everyone left and we were cleaning up, I made some comment about how nice it was to have people over at our house. My partner corrected me casually, almost absently, said my house technically, like they were correcting a minor factual error. Like telling me I'd gotten the street name wrong. I laughed, asked what they meant. They said exactly what they'd said. It was technically their house. I asked them to clarify because that didn't make any sense. We'd bought it together. They said yes, we'd gone through the process together, but the deed was in their name only. I just stood there holding a trash bag full of paper plates, trying to process what I was hearing. I asked why. They said it was for tax purposes, something about getting a better rate as a single buyer, that we'd add my name to the deed later, once everything was settled. This was the first I was hearing about any of this. I asked to see the deed. They hesitated, then pulled it up on their laptop, showed me the document. One name, theirs. I scrolled through looking for mine anywhere. It wasn't there. Not on the deed, not on the mortgage, not on any of the official paperwork. As far as the county was concerned, I didn't exist. I asked when exactly they were planning to add my name. They got defensive, said they'd get around to it, that it wasn't a priority right now, that I was overreacting. I pointed out that I'd paid $20,000 toward a down payment on a house I apparently didn't own. They said it was an investment in our future together, that I needed to trust them. The word trust coming out of their mouth after finding out they'd been lying by omission for 6 months was almost funny. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay there staring at the ceiling of a bedroom in a house I thought was partially mine, realizing I'd been played. Every decision we'd made together, every dollar I'd contributed, every weekend I'd spent fixing the place up, and my name wasn't on a single piece of legal documentation. The next morning, I called a lawyer, explained the situation. The lawyer asked if I had any paperwork showing my financial contribution. I had bank records of the 20,000 transfer. I had 6 months of Venmo payments to my partner for my half of the mortgage. The lawyer said that was something, but without my name on the deed or mortgage, I had no ownership claim to the property itself. I asked what my options were. The lawyer said I could sue for the return of my financial contributions, prove I'd paid under the assumption of shared ownership. It wouldn't be easy and there were no guarantees, but it was possible. Or I could try to negotiate directly with my partner for either being added to the deed or being repaid. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went home and confronted my partner directly, asked them point blank if they'd ever intended to add me to the deed. They got angry, said I was being paranoid and ungrateful, that they'd done all the work of finding the house and handling the paperwork, and I was attacking them over technicalities. I asked if my $20,000 plus 6 months of mortgage payments were technicalities. They said I lived there, benefited from the house, and needed to stop making everything about money. I told them I wanted my name added to the deed immediately. They said it wasn't that simple, that there were tax implications, that we'd need to refinance. I said, fine, let's refinance. They said they didn't want to deal with that right now. I asked when they would want to deal with it. They said when they were ready. That's when I realized this had never been about tax purposes or better rates or any of the excuses they'd given. They deliberately kept the house in their name only to maintain control, to make sure that if anything went wrong, they'd be the one with all the power and I'd be the one with nothing. I moved out that week, took every piece of furniture I'd paid for, every dish, every decoration. My partner tried to stop me, said half that stuff belonged to the house. I showed them receipts. Every item I loaded into the moving truck had my name on the purchase record. They threatened to call the police. I invited them to try. My lawyer sent a formal demand letter, return of the down payment contribution plus 6 months of mortgage payments, or we'd file suit. My partner's response through their lawyer was that I'd been living there rent-free and owed them for 6 months of housing. My lawyer responded with the Venmo records, showing I'd paid my half of everything. We went back and forth for weeks. Their position kept shifting. First it was that the money was a gift, then it was rent, then it was an investment with no guaranteed return. My lawyer just kept presenting the same evidence: bank transfers, payment records, texts discussing our shared ownership and split expenses. Things went from bad to unhinged. They tried claiming I'd damaged the property when I moved out, sent photos of scratched floors and wall marks. I sent photos I'd taken the day I left showing everything in perfect condition. They claimed I'd stolen items that belonged to the house. I provided receipts showing I'd purchased everything I took. They were grasping at anything to avoid repaying what they owed. Finally, their lawyer suggested settling. My lawyer negotiated. I got back my $20,000 down payment plus the mortgage contributions, minus a small amount they claimed for utilities and minor repairs. Not perfect, but better than dragging it through court for months. The money hit my account 6 weeks after I moved out. I sat there looking at the deposit. This chunk of my savings returned to me like none of it had ever happened. Except it had happened. I'd spent 6 months living in a house I thought I owned, building a future I thought was shared, with someone who'd been lying to me the entire time. The worst part is how subtle it was. They never sat me down and explicitly lied. They just didn't correct my assumptions, let me believe we were buying together when really I was just funding their down payment. Let me paint and plant and decorate like it was my home when legally I was just a tenant with no lease. I ran into a mutual friend a few months later. They asked what happened with the house. I gave them the short version. They looked shocked, said my ex had told everyone I'd bailed on the relationship and abandoned them with all the costs, just completely rewritten the narrative to make themselves the victim. I don't try to correct the story anymore. The people who matter know the truth. The ones who believe my ex's version weren't really my friends anyway. The experience taught me something valuable though. Love doesn't protect you legally. Trust doesn't override documentation. If you're making major financial decisions with someone, get everything in writing. Have the uncomfortable conversations. Verify what you're told, because assuming the best in someone can cost you everything. I'm more careful now. Probably too careful. I make people show me paperwork, insist on joint ownership of anything I contribute to, get agreements in writing even when it feels awkward. Some people think I'm paranoid. I think I'm protected. And speaking of legal protection, let me tell you about the wedding contract nobody told me I was signing. My in-laws offered to help pay for the wedding. That was their opening move, and I should have seen it for what it was. Not generosity. Leverage. My fiancé and I had been talking about something small, maybe 50 people, close friends and family, in a garden or a small venue. Something personal and meaningful, not some massive production. We'd save money, keep it intimate, actually enjoy the day instead of spending it greeting hundreds of people we barely knew. Then his parents sat us down and said they wanted to contribute, said it was important to them to help us start our marriage off right. They had a number in mind, a generous one, and they wanted to make sure we had the wedding we deserved. I should have asked what they meant by deserved. The first battle was the guest list. I suggested around 50 people. My mother-in-law laughed like I'd told a joke, said they alone had over 100 people they needed to invite. Business associates, extended family, friends from their social circle, people who'd be offended if they weren't included. I pointed out that we didn't know most of these people. She said that didn't matter, that weddings were about bringing families together and honoring relationships. My fiancé sat there nodding along, said maybe we could compromise, do something a bit bigger than I'd wanted, but smaller than what his parents were suggesting. We ended up with a guest list of 300, 200 of whom I'd never met. Then came the venue. I'd found this beautiful garden space, intimate and romantic, perfect for the kind of ceremony I'd imagined. My mother-in-law took one look at the photos and said it wouldn't work. Not enough parking, no backup plan for weather, too casual for the kind of event this needed to be. She'd already researched alternatives, showed us brochures for a cathedral downtown. Massive, ornate, could seat 500 people. I said it was too big, too formal, not what I wanted. She said it was elegant and appropriate, and that I'd thank her later when I saw the photos. My fiancé said maybe we should look at it before deciding. We looked at it. I hated it. The ceilings were so high your voice echoed. The pews were uncomfortable. It felt cold and impersonal. Everything I didn't want. We booked it anyway, because his mother had already put down a deposit. Every single decision went the same way. The flowers I wanted were too simple, so we got elaborate centerpieces I didn't recognize. The DJ I'd researched was too young and inexperienced, so we hired someone from their country club. The cake design I'd chosen was too modern, so we went with traditional tears and sugar flowers. I tried pushing back every time my fiancé would say his parents were just trying to help, that they had more experience with formal events, that maybe I should trust their judgment. He'd promised we'd make the next decision together, then side with them again when it mattered. The photographer was the final straw before the wedding. I'd found someone whose work I loved, documentary style, candid moments, real emotion. My mother-in-law said we needed someone more established, someone who did classic portraits. She had a photographer in mind, someone who'd shot her friends' daughters' weddings. I looked at his portfolio, stiff posed shots, everyone looking directly at the camera with forced smiles. Exactly what I didn't want. I said no, actually put my foot down for once. She booked him anyway, said she was paying for the photography and this was non-negotiable. That's when I realized I'd lost control of my own wedding entirely. This wasn't a collaboration or a compromise. This was their event, and I was just the bride-shaped prop they dressed up and positioned where they wanted. But that wasn't even the worst part. The wedding day arrived. I got ready in a fog, going through the motions, wearing a dress I hadn't chosen, about to walk down an aisle in a venue I hated to marry someone who I was starting to wonder if I really knew at all. The cathedral was huge, cavernous, and as guests started arriving, it became obvious we had a problem. The 300 people we'd invited, maybe half showed up, probably less. Entire sections of pews sat empty. The massive space that my mother-in-law had insisted we needed looked pathetic with 150 people scattered throughout. You could hear every cough, every whisper echoing off the vaulted ceilings. My mother-in-law was frantically texting, trying to figure out where everyone was. Turns out a lot of her business associates and social circle friends had RSVP'd, yes, but just didn't show. Some sent last-minute regrets, most didn't bother with even that courtesy. The ceremony happened. I said my vows while staring at rows of empty pews and strangers' faces. The photographer my mother-in-law had insisted on never showed up. Not late, just completely no-showed. We found out later he'd double booked and decided the other wedding was more important. So we had no professional photos, just whatever guests managed to snap on their phones in that echoing empty cathedral. The reception was at a country club, another venue I hadn't chosen, decorated in a style I didn't like, with food I hadn't tasted before it was served. My mother-in-law spent the entire cocktail hour complaining loudly to anyone who'd listen, about the embarrassing turnout, about how she couldn't believe people would RSVP and not show, about how this never would have happened if we'd gone with a smaller venue like she'd originally suggested. Actually said that, like the cathedral hadn't been her idea that she'd push through over my objections. Then she started in on me, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, saying if I'd just listened to her about the venue size, if I'd been more flexible about the guest list, if I'd understood the kind of event this needed to be, we wouldn't be in this situation. I was standing there in a dress I didn't choose, at a reception I didn't plan, being blamed for decisions I'd argued against. And my husband was just letting it happen, not defending me, not telling his mother to stop, just looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. That's when everything unraveled. I walked over to where the DJ was set up, asked for the microphone. He looked confused but handed it over. The music cut out. Everyone turned to look. I thanked everyone for coming. Then I said I wanted to clarify something since there seemed to be confusion about how we'd ended up with such an embarrassing turnout in such an oversized venue. I listed every decision, the cathedral I'd argued against, the 300-person guest list I'd said was too large, the photographer who'd been hired over my objections and hadn't bothered to show up, the flowers, the food, the DJ, every single element that had been chosen by my in-laws while I'd been told to be grateful for their help and their financial contribution. I said if anyone was embarrassed about how the day had turned out, they should take it up with the people who'd actually made the decisions, because it sure wasn't me. Then I set the microphone down, grabbed my purse, and walked out of my own wedding reception. I made it to the parking lot before my husband caught up with me. He was panicking, begging me to come back, saying we could fix this, that I was overreacting. I told him I'd spent 6 months watching him choose his parents over me on every single decision that mattered, that I'd just been publicly blamed for their mistakes while he stood there silent. I asked him to choose, right now, them or me. His parents and their need to control everything, or a marriage where we were actually partners. He hesitated, didn't say anything, just stood there looking back at the country club like he was calculating whether he could convince me to go back inside and smooth things over. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I got in my car and drove to my best friend's apartment, spent my wedding night on her couch, still in my wedding dress, crying and eating takeout. She didn't ask questions, just sat with me and let me process. I filed for an annulment 3 weeks later. The marriage had never been consummated. I'd been coerced into decisions I didn't agree with, and I could make a case for it never being a real marriage to begin with. My husband tried fighting it at first, then gave up when he realized I was serious. His parents tried to guilt me, sent messages about the money they'd spent, the embarrassment I'd caused, how I'd humiliated their son. I blocked them, blocked most of his family too. Anyone who had an opinion about me walking out could keep it to themselves. The whole thing cost me about a year of my life and whatever I'd contributed financially to the wedding disaster. But it saved me from decades of being steamrolled by people who thought money gave them control over my life. My ex-husband got remarried 2 years later, to someone his mother approved of. They had the wedding his parents wanted, from what I heard. I genuinely hope she's happy living that life. It wasn't for me. I learned something valuable though. When someone offers to help pay for something, ask what strings are attached. And when your partner consistently chooses other people over you, believe them the first time. Don't wait until you're standing in a cathedral you hate wearing a dress you didn't choose to figure out. The relationship isn't going to work. But financial manipulation doesn't always come wrapped in wedding plans. My best friend Sarah called me in tears one night. We'd known each other since elementary school, been through everything together. She was going through a messy divorce, her credit was trashed because her ex had maxed out their joint cards, and she desperately needed to find a new apartment. The problem was, no landlord would approve her without a cosigner. She asked if I'd help, Just temporarily, she promised, just until she could rebuild her credit over the next year or so. She had a good job, stable income, and she'd never missed a payment on anything before her ex destroyed everything. She just needed someone to vouch for her while she got back on her feet. 20 years of friendship. I'd been a bridesmaid at her wedding. She'd helped me through my own rough patches. Of course I said yes. I met her at the leasing office, signed the paperwork, listened to the property manager explain that as a co-signer, I'd be equally responsible for the lease. I nodded along but honestly wasn't worried. This was Sarah. She was responsible, reliable, one of the most trustworthy people I knew. The first 6 months went fine. She'd text me after making each rent payment, thank me again for helping her out. We'd grab dinner occasionally and she'd update me on how the divorce was progressing, how much she loved the new place, how grateful she was to have a fresh start. Then, month 7, no text. I figured she'd just forgotten to let me know. Month 8, still nothing. I sent her a message asking if everything was okay with the apartment. She responded that everything was fine. Sorry for not updating me. Month 9, I got a call from the property management company. Rent hadn't been paid in 3 months. They'd been trying to reach Sarah, but she wasn't responding. As the co-signer, they were notifying me that I was responsible for the outstanding balance. I told them there must be a mistake, that Sarah had a good job and would never just stop paying. They said they'd been leaving notices on her door for weeks with no response. I tried calling Sarah, voicemail, texted her, no response, drove to the apartment and knocked. Nothing. I called her work and they told me she'd quit 2 months ago. I felt my stomach drop. Over the next week, I tried everything. Called her parents who said they hadn't heard from her in a while. Messaged mutual friends who said she'd been distant lately. Checked her social media, which had gone quiet around the same time the rent stopped. She'd just vanished. The property management company kept calling. The balance was growing. Late fees, damages they were discovering now that they'd entered the unit, cleaning costs. I asked if they'd heard from her. They said no, and that if the balance wasn't paid, they'd be filing for eviction and pursuing legal action. I paid 1 month's rent just to buy time while I tried to track her down. Then another. By month 3, I was $12,000 deep and still couldn't find her. That's when the lawsuit arrived. The landlord was suing both of us for $18,000. Back rent, damages to the unit, legal fees, early termination penalties. The apartment had apparently been trashed. Holes in walls, carpet destroyed, appliances broken. They had photos. It looked like a completely different place from the tidy apartment I'd helped her move into. My lawyer explained my options. As a co-signer, I was legally liable for everything. I could try to fight it, but I'd almost certainly lose and rack up more legal fees. The best option was to settle or pay the judgment, then sue Sarah separately to recover what I'd paid. I paid the $18,000, wiped out most of my emergency savings, got the judgment satisfied to protect my credit. Then I hired the lawyer to go after Sarah. That's when everything unraveled. My lawyer's investigator found her in about a week. She'd moved in with a new boyfriend 2 months after I co-signed the lease. Just decided she didn't want to pay for 2 places, abandoned the apartment she'd begged me to help her get, and ghosted everyone who might ask questions. We served her with the lawsuit at her boyfriend's house. She finally called me, not to apologize, but to ask why I was being so dramatic about this. Said she thought I'd understand since I made more money than her, that she'd been going through a hard time and couldn't afford both the apartment and her new life, that I should have just handled it quietly instead of making it into a legal thing. The audacity was genuinely breathtaking. I told her she'd cost me $18,000 and destroyed 20 years of friendship. She said I was being selfish, that real friends help each other without keeping score. I asked if real friends also abandon apartments and ghost people who put their credit on the line for them. She hung up. The lawsuit moved forward. She didn't even bother getting a lawyer, just ignored all the court dates. I won by default. The judge ordered her to repay the full $18,000 plus my legal fees and interest. I thought that was the end of it. Finally, some justice, some accountability. Then her lawyer sent notice that she was filing for bankruptcy. Bankruptcy wipes out most debts, including judgments from civil suits. My $18,000 court victory became worthless paper. She declared bankruptcy, got a fresh start, and I was left holding a massive loss that I'd never recover. I tried one last time to reach out, sent her a message saying I couldn't believe she'd do this to someone who'd been there for her for 2 decades. She responded that I needed to let it go, that she'd made mistakes, but bankruptcy gave her a second chance, and I should be happy for her. Happy for her. While I was out $18,000 and she was living rent-free with her new boyfriend without a care in the world. I blocked her on everything, cut off the mutual friends who suggested I was being too harsh, that people make mistakes, that I should forgive her. Because this wasn't a mistake. This was a series of deliberate choices that showed exactly how little our friendship meant when it conflicted with her convenience. The financial loss hurt. $18,000 is a lot of money, but the betrayal hurt worse. Finding out that someone I'd trusted completely, someone I'd known for most of my life, had used me without a second thought and then blamed me for being upset about it. I learned an expensive lesson about co-signing, about how even the most trustworthy person can change when circumstances shift, about how friendship doesn't override legal liability and good intentions don't protect you from financial disaster. Now, when people ask me to co-sign for something, the answer is always no. Not maybe, not let me think about it, just no. Family, friends, doesn't matter. I won't do it. Some people think that's cold or selfish. I think it's self-preservation based on hard-earned experience. Sarah sent me a friend request on social media about a year later. Like enough time had passed that we could just reconnect and pretend none of it happened. I deleted it without responding. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. Some friendships don't survive betrayal. And some people show you exactly who they are when money gets involved. The worst part is she probably tells the story differently, probably paints herself as the victim of a messy divorce who had one bad year and a judgmental friend who couldn't let go of money. The narrative where she abandoned a lease, destroyed property, ghosted me for months, and then declared bankruptcy to avoid consequences probably doesn't get mentioned. But I know the truth. And that's enough. I've got my credit intact, my savings slowly rebuilding, and a much clearer understanding of who deserves my trust. Expensive lessons stick with you. This one cost me $18,000 and 20 years of friendship, but at least I learned it. And sometimes the person borrowing isn't just asking for your signature, they're taking your entire identity. My best friend since middle school asked to borrow my laptop one afternoon, said she needed it for a job application, that her computer had crashed and she had an interview the next day. Of course I said yes. We'd been roommates for 2 years at that point, shared everything. I trusted her completely. She used it for maybe an hour, handed it back, thanked me. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? This was someone I'd known for over a decade, someone I considered family. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from a bank. They wanted to verify some recent purchases on my credit card. I told them I didn't have a credit card with their bank. They insisted I did, that it had been opened 2 weeks ago and was already carrying a balance of $6,000. I told them that was impossible. They read me the account details, my name, my social security number, my address, everything correct except I'd never applied for the card. I hung up thinking it was some kind of scam call. Then I checked my credit report. There it was, a new credit card I'd never opened. I called the bank back, explained there'd been a mistake. They suggested I file a fraud report. Before I could do that, another bank called. Same story. Credit card in my name, maxed out, nearly $8,000. Then another call, and another. By the end of the week, I discovered 5 different credit cards, all opened within a 3-week period. All maxed out. $40,000 in debt that I knew nothing about. I pulled my credit report in detail, looked at the application dates. They all traced back to right around when my friend had borrowed my laptop. I went back through my browser history, my saved passwords, my documents folder. She'd accessed everything. My tax returns with my social security number, my saved bank login information, files with my mother's maiden name and all the security question answers. She'd used my own laptop to steal my entire identity. I confronted her that night, asked her directly if she'd opened credit cards in my name. She immediately started crying. Not defensive crying, guilty crying. She admitted everything, said she had a shopping problem, that she'd gotten into debt and panicked, that she'd seen an opportunity and made a terrible mistake. She promised she'd pay it all back, begged me not to go to the police, said she'd do anything to make it right. I asked her to show me what she'd bought. She took me to her room, clothes with tags still on them, shoes she'd never worn, designer handbags still in boxes, makeup and jewelry and electronics, thousands of dollars worth of stuff just sitting there unused. She'd spent $40,000 on things she didn't even want badly enough to use. She kept apologizing, kept saying it was an addiction, that she needed help. And maybe that was true, but she'd also stolen my identity, destroyed my credit, and put me $40,000 in debt. Addiction didn't excuse that. I filed a police report the next morning. The officer took my statement, looked at the evidence I'd gathered, and said this was pretty clear-cut identity theft. They arrested her that afternoon. That's when things got worse. During the investigation, 2 other people came forward. Friends of hers from college. She'd done the same thing to both of them. Borrowed their laptops or phones, gained access to their personal information, opened credit cards in their names. One of them had been dealing with the fallout for over a year. Had no idea it was her until the police contacted them about my case. 3 victims, over $70,000 in fraudulent debt combined. And this was someone we'd all trusted completely. Someone who'd been in our homes, met our families, knew our secrets. The prosecutors charged her with multiple counts of identity theft and fraud. Her lawyer tried arguing for probation, said she had a mental health condition that explained the behavior, that she was getting treatment. The judge wasn't sympathetic. She got 3 years in prison. I should have felt relieved. Justice served, case closed. Instead, I just felt hollow. This person I'd known since we were 12, who I'd shared an apartment with, who I'd trusted with everything, had systematically destroyed my financial life for shopping money. The debt itself became a nightmare to resolve. Each credit card company had different fraud departments with different procedures. I had to file police reports with each one, provide documentation, fill out affidavits. Some of them were helpful. Others acted like I was trying to scam them, like maybe I'd really made the purchases and was trying to get out of paying. I had to freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus, set up fraud alerts, monitor everything constantly, change every password I'd ever used because I didn't know what else she might have accessed. The paranoia was exhausting. 2 banks refused to remove the debt initially, said I'd been negligent by letting someone use my laptop, that I was partially responsible. I had to get a lawyer involved, sent them copies of the police report, the criminal charges, proof that I was a victim of a crime. It took months of fighting before they finally agreed to clear the charges. My credit score tanked, dropped almost 200 points. I'd been planning to buy a car. That was impossible now. I got denied for an apartment lease because of the marks on my credit. Had to explain to the landlord that I was a victim of identity theft, show documentation, basically prove I wasn't a financial risk. It took 2 years to fully resolve everything. 2 years of paperwork and phone calls and credit monitoring. 2 years of explaining to banks and creditors that, no, I didn't buy $3,000 worth of designer shoes. My former best friend did using my stolen identity. The worst part wasn't even the financial damage. It was the trust issues. I couldn't let anyone borrow my phone without watching them. Couldn't leave my laptop unattended. Started using password managers and 2-factor authentication on everything. Became paranoid about who had access to my personal information. And it wasn't just her I stopped trusting. It was everyone. If my best friend since middle school could do this to me, who else might? What other people in my life were just waiting for an opportunity to exploit my trust? I went to therapy for a while. Tried to work through the betrayal and the anxiety. The therapist said what happened to me was a violation similar to other kinds of abuse, that having someone you trust use that trust to harm you creates deep psychological damage, that it was normal to have trouble trusting people afterward. My friend got out of prison after serving 2 years. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd completed some kind of addiction treatment program while inside, that she was working retail and trying to rebuild her life. Someone suggested I might want to hear her out, that maybe she'd changed. I blocked her number before she could try to contact me. Whatever journey she was on, whatever growth she'd experienced, it didn't involve me. She'd made her choices and I'd dealt with the consequences. I didn't owe her forgiveness or a second chance. The other 2 victims and I connected during the legal process. We have a group chat now, dark humor about our shared trauma, check in with each other when one of us is having a hard time trusting someone new. It's nice having people who understand exactly what this kind of betrayal feels like. I still have her stuff, the things she bought with my stolen identity. The police returned it all after the trial. I should probably sell it or donate it, but I keep it in a closet. A reminder. A very expensive reminder of what misplaced trust can cost. My credit is mostly recovered now. The marks have faded, my score is back up. I can function financially again. But I'll never be as trusting as I was before. Can't leave my laptop out. Can't share passwords. Can't assume that friendship means safety. People say I should let it go, that holding on to the anger is only hurting myself. Maybe they're right, but the anger keeps me careful, keeps me from making the same mistake twice, keeps me from trusting someone just because we've known each other a long time. Because I learned that history doesn't prevent betrayal. Sometimes the people who've known you longest are the ones who know exactly how to hurt you worst. But identity theft isn't the only way someone can steal your future. My manager pulled me into her office one afternoon and told me she saw real potential in me, said she wanted to mentor me personally, help me develop the skills I'd need for the next level. There was a senior position opening up in the next 6 months and she thought I'd be perfect for it. I was excited. I'd been with the company for 4 years, consistently hit my targets, gotten good reviews. A promotion felt overdue, and having my manager actively supporting me seemed like exactly the break I needed. She laid out a development plan, said I needed to understand the broader operational processes, not just my current role. She'd have me document workflows, learn the advanced systems the senior team used, maybe even present some strategic initiatives to upper management. Get my face known, show them I could think at that level. It sounded reasonable. I threw myself into it. Spent hours after work documenting every process in our department. Learned software I'd never needed before. My manager kept praising my initiative, saying this was exactly the kind of dedication leadership required. About a month in, she introduced me to someone new. Said this was Rachel, a consultant she'd brought in to observe our operations and provide an outside perspective. Asked me to walk Rachel through everything I'd been documenting, show her how our systems worked, explain the strategies I'd been developing. I did. Spent weeks essentially giving Rachel a comprehensive training on every aspect of the department. My manager framed it as good practice for me, said explaining things to others was a key leadership skill, that teaching Rachel would help solidify my own understanding. Rachel asked great questions, took detailed notes, seemed genuinely interested in understanding not just what we did, but why we did it that way. I actually enjoyed working with her, felt like I was contributing something valuable. Then my manager asked me to present my strategic initiatives to the senior leadership team. Said this was my chance to shine, to show them I could think strategically. I prepared for weeks, put together a comprehensive presentation on how we could streamline operations, reduce costs, improve client retention, used all the research and documentation I'd been doing. The presentation went well, senior leadership asked good questions, seemed impressed. My manager beamed at me afterward, said I'd knocked it out of the park. I felt like the promotion was basically locked in at that point. 2 weeks later, my manager called a department meeting, said she had an announcement to make. She was retiring. After 20 years with the company, she was ready to move on. There were some sympathetic murmurs, a few people looked genuinely sad. Then she introduced her replacement, Rachel, who'd be stepping into the role immediately, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative ideas to the department. I felt like I'd been punched. I must have looked confused because my manager addressed it directly. Said she knew some people might have expected an internal promotion, but the company had decided to go external for this position. That Rachel brought valuable outside experience we needed. Rachel stood up and thanked everyone, started talking about her vision for the department, used phrases I recognized, ideas I'd developed, strategies I'd presented to senior leadership 2 weeks earlier. After the meeting, I went straight to my manager's office, asked her point blank what had happened to the promotion she'd been grooming me for. She looked uncomfortable, said she'd never actually promised me anything, that this had always been about professional development. That the mentorship was real even if the outcome wasn't what I'd hoped. I asked about Rachel, about why I'd spent weeks training someone who turned out to be my manager's replacement. She said Rachel had needed to understand our operations, and having me walk her through everything was efficient, that it wasn't personal, just business. The realization hit me all at once. The mentorship had never been about preparing me for promotion. It had been about getting me to document everything and train Rachel so the transition would be smooth. I'd literally spent 3 months preparing my own replacement while thinking I was being developed for advancement. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went to HR, explained what had happened, that I'd been told I was being mentored for a promotion that apparently never existed. The HR rep looked sympathetic but said the senior position had always been slated as an external hire, that my manager had been authorized to bring in an outside candidate months ago. I asked why nobody had told me that while I was spending evenings and weekends documenting processes and developing strategies. The HR rep said my professional development was still valuable regardless of the promotion outcome, that the experience I'd gained would serve me well in my career. I asked if they understood that I'd been used, that my manager had deliberately misled me to get free labor training, her replacement. The HR rep said that wasn't how they saw it, that mentorship took many forms, and that I shouldn't view this negatively. I quit that day. No 2 weeks notice, no transition plan, just cleaned out my desk and left. My manager tried calling me that evening. I didn't answer. She sent an email saying she was disappointed in how I was handling this, that walking out was unprofessional and would hurt my reputation in the industry. The audacity was almost impressive. I had a job lined up within a week. A competitor had been trying to recruit me for months, and I'd always said no out of loyalty to my current company. I called them back and said I was interested. They made me an offer that was 20% higher than what I'd been making, with an actual path to promotion that was documented in writing. Then I reached out to 3 of my former company's biggest clients, the ones I'd developed relationships with over 4 years, the ones I'd personally managed and knew inside and out. I told them I'd moved to a new firm and would love to continue working with them if they were interested in exploring options. All 3 moved their business within 2 months. It wasn't against any non-compete I'd signed because I'd never had one. My old company tried to fight it, threatened legal action, but their lawyers apparently told them they didn't have a case. My former manager called me, said what I'd done was unethical and unprofessional, that I was sabotaging the department and hurting people who trusted me. I pointed out that she'd used me to train my own replacement while pretending to mentor me for a promotion that never existed. Asked her which of us had actually betrayed trust. She said that was different, that she'd done what was best for the company. I said I was doing what was best for my career, which was exactly what she'd taught me. Things went from bad to unhinged on her end. She apparently bad-mouthed me to other people in the industry. I heard through contacts that she was telling people I'd stolen clients, that I was vindictive and unreliable. A few people reached out asking for my side. I told them the truth, that I'd been systematically used and misled, that I'd documented everything including emails where my manager discussed mentoring me for promotion, and that the clients had chosen to follow me because we had genuine relationships. Most people understood. The ones who didn't weren't people I wanted to work with anyway. Rachel reached out about 6 months later, said she wanted to clear the air, that she hadn't known I was being told I was training for a promotion. She'd been hired as a consultant initially and then offered the permanent role and assumed I knew the situation. I actually believed her. She'd been a pawn in this too, just one who'd benefited instead of being screwed over. I told her I didn't hold it against her personally, but I also didn't want to maintain any kind of relationship. She understood. The whole experience taught me something important about workplace politics. People will absolutely use you if you let them. They'll frame it as mentorship or professional development or opportunity, but if it benefits them more than you, pay attention to that imbalance and get everything in writing. Every promise, every commitment, every development plan. Because trust me from a manager means nothing when they're protecting their own interests. My new company is better. The promotion path they outlined actually happened. I got moved up 8 months after joining, with a clear title change and salary increase. When they say they're developing you for something, they mean it. And when they bring in external consultants, they're honest about what role those people will play. I still use the strategies I developed at my old job, the ones my former manager took credit for through Rachel. They work even better at a company that actually values the people implementing them. And every time I close a deal with one of those 3 clients I brought over, I think about my former manager's face when she realized what I'd done. She called it unprofessional. I call it a fair return on a 3-month investment of my time and trust that she completely wasted. You can't use people and then act shocked when they stop letting you. And if you think workplace deception is bad, wait until your own family asks you to bury the truth. My brother was always the golden child. Star athlete in high school, charismatic, could charm anyone. My parents worshipped him. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need constant attention or validation, which meant I didn't get much of either. He went into finance after college, worked for an investment firm, made good money, drove a nice car, had the fancy apartment. My parents bragged about him constantly, told everyone how successful he was, how proud they were. Meanwhile, I was working as a teacher, living modestly, and that apparently wasn't worth mentioning. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my mum called me in hysterics. My brother had been arrested at work, escorted out in handcuffs in front of all his colleagues. They were charging him with embezzlement. He'd been stealing from client accounts for over 2 years, moving money around to cover his lifestyle, and the firm had finally caught on. My first question was how much. She said the charges alleged around $300,000. I just sat there trying to process that number. My brother had stolen $300,000 from the people who trusted him with their money. My mum was crying, saying it was a misunderstanding, that he'd explained everything, that we needed to support him through this. My dad got on the phone and said the family needed to present a united front, that we couldn't let this destroy everything my brother had worked for. I pointed out that my brother had destroyed it himself by committing multiple felonies. My dad said I wasn't being helpful. The damage control started immediately. My parents called every relative, every family friend, everyone who might hear about the arrest. They told everyone my brother was taking a sabbatical to deal with stress, that he was fine, just needed some time away from work. They made me promise not to tell anyone the truth. I didn't promise anything. I just didn't volunteer information. If someone asked how my brother was doing, I said I didn't know. Let them interpret that however they wanted. A week later, my parents asked me to come over, said they needed to discuss something important. I showed up and they had a whole presentation prepared. My brother needed a good lawyer. The public defender wasn't going to cut it for charges this serious. They'd found someone who specialized in white-collar crime, and he charged $15,000 as a retainer. They wanted me to loan my brother the money. I actually laughed, asked if they were serious. They said completely serious, that family helps family, that I had savings and my brother needed support, that this was his entire future on the line. I told them no. My dad's face went red. He asked why I was being so selfish. I said I wasn't being selfish, I was declining to fund a criminal defense for someone who'd stolen $300,000. That maybe my brother should have thought about legal fees before committing fraud. My mom started crying again, said I was abandoning my brother when he needed me most. That she couldn't believe I'd turned my back on family like this. My dad said I'd regret this, that I was choosing money over my own brother. I left, blocked their calls for a few days because I needed space from the guilt trip. My brother ended up getting a lawyer somehow. I assume my parents mortgaged something or borrowed from someone else. He went to trial, was convicted on multiple counts, and got sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The entire time he was away, my parents rewrote the narrative, told everyone he was dealing with health issues and staying with a friend out of state, that I'd refused to help during his medical crisis, that I was cold and unsupportive and had basically disowned him over a misunderstanding. I heard this through cousins, through family friends, through random relatives who'd reach out with concerned messages asking why I'd abandoned my brother. I'd correct them, tell them the truth, and they'd act shocked. Some believed me, others thought I was lying or exaggerating. My parents stopped inviting me to family events, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. I just wasn't included anymore. They'd post photos on social media of gatherings I hadn't been told about. The message was clear. I'd chosen not to support my brother, so I wasn't family anymore. Then came the breaking point. My cousin got married. Big family wedding, everyone invited, including me, surprisingly. I almost didn't go, but I was close with my cousin and didn't want to punish her for my parents' behavior. The reception was fine at first. I stayed away from my parents, caught up with relatives I actually liked. Then my aunt cornered me, started in on how disappointed she was in me. How could I abandon my brother during his health crisis? How family was supposed to stick together? How ashamed my parents were of my behavior. She was saying all this loudly. People were turning to look. My parents were across the room watching with these satisfied expressions, like they'd orchestrated this whole thing. I'd had enough. I asked my aunt what health crisis she was referring to. She said my brother's condition, the reason he'd been away for over a year. I said there was no health crisis. She looked confused. I told her my brother was in federal prison for embezzling $300,000 from his employer. The look on her face was worth everything that came after. I didn't stop there. Told her and everyone else listening that my parents had been lying for over a year, that they'd asked me to lie too, that they'd demanded I give my brother $15,000 for a criminal defense lawyer and cut me off when I refused, that I was tired of protecting his image and theirs when he'd earned every consequence he was facing. My aunt just stared at me. My parents rushed over. My dad grabbed my arm and told me I needed to leave. I pulled away and said I was done leaving, done being quiet, done letting them paint me as the villain for refusing to enable a criminal. I walked out of that wedding with my head high. Half the family was staring. The other half was pulling out their phones, probably Googling my brother's name to verify what I'd said. They'd find the court records, the news articles, everything my parents had tried to hide. My parents haven't spoken to me since. It's been almost 2 years. My brother got out of prison, is on probation, working some entry-level job because his finance career is obviously over. I heard he's living with my parents, that they're supporting him while he gets back on his feet. The extended family is split. Some people think I was cruel for airing everything publicly. Others reached out privately to say they appreciated finally knowing the truth. A few apologized for believing my parents' lies without asking me directly. I don't regret it. Not the refusal to give him money, not the refusal to lie, and definitely not telling the truth when I'd been publicly attacked for supposedly abandoning him. You don't get to commit fraud, go to prison, and then have your family rewrite history to make you the victim. You don't get to demand money and loyalty from people you've never shown the same consideration. And you don't get to weaponize the rest of the family against someone who refused to play along. My parents chose protecting my brother's image over having a relationship with me. They chose the lie over the truth. That was their decision, and they get to live with it. Meanwhile, I'm teaching, living my quiet, modest life that was never worth bragging about, and I've never felt more free. No more guilt trips, no more being told I'm not doing enough, no more twisted narratives where I'm somehow the problem. Standing up for yourself isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. Sometimes the people who demand your loyalty have never earned it, and that's okay. You're allowed to protect your peace, your truth, and your future. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're part of the family now. Subscribe, comment with your own stories if you feel brave, and I'll see you in the next one. Sleep well and don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking you're the villain for setting boundaries. You're not. You never were.